Finally get through the changes.
No, I think I like get back on Friday.
I love Jim.
Hello, Melanie.
So Victoria just texted me, she's gonna be about 15 minutes late. She asked that we get started.
Okay.
So as the vice chair of
Okay.
the steering committee, if you wanna
Good morning, everyone.
call to order, we would like to come here.
Good morning. Happy holiday weekend. Looks like everyone's here except Victoria, so public comment is not on the agenda.
Hi, I'm David O'Neill, and
Use your microphone, David.
hi, I'm David O'Neill, and recently I've been going through the general plan, and it encourages, quote unquote, change in new construction as long as it is consistent with established character, end quote. Therefore, we have logically suggested that only homes consistent with that established character be built in Carmel-by-the-Sea. In response to this suggestion, at the city's Design Traditions 1.5 Steering Committee meeting on May 11th, 2023, Mary Ann Schickenstance made a statement. As an appointed steering committee member, in reference to this suggestion, the video is available on the city YouTube channel, and the exact quote by Ms. Schickenstance is, "Next thing, the Jews and the blacks don't belong here either, because they don't really fit into our picture." And that's exactly what's used for doing not doing inclusionary housing. Because the Mexicans can live in Seaside, why do we have to build for them anything in Carmel? End quote. Instead of addressing the logic of the suggestion that we made, she made an erroneous personal attack. It was horribly offensive to me and to many in the community, and brings up some very important questions. Can a person's design preferences make them a victim of racism? Is someone a racist for supporting architecture that is consistent with the general plan? Is there a conflict of interest for a design steering committee member who insists on design attributes that may be contrary to the general plan and will directly benefit her personal business? When Mary Ann was away from these meetings, we had differences of perspective, but wasn't it always peaceful and productive? That's why I love being here, involved in this community. I'm so grateful to everyone who's worked so hard and cares so much about this beautiful village and all our neighbors. Thank you.
Brianna, we'll give you the opportunity to comment if you want to in a minute. Anyone else have anything? Neil?
Thinking in part about what David just talked to us about, I wanted to mention some things about the words that our culture is using right now. Two of its favorite words are diversity and inclusivity. But what is never discussed is the opposite of those words, which must be discussed every time one is used. When you talk about diversity, you must balance it with homogeneity. Every culture has a right to like its own character, to like its own setting, to like its own nature, and to want to preserve that specific quality. They cannot do it if they are not allowed to exclude things that will violate that character. So inclusivity must be partnered with exclusivity. I remember having long conversations with Don Freeman about the right that a city has to protect its character and to protect its quality. The other one is diversity. Well, diversity, homogeneity, inclusivity, exclusivity. I think you get my point that we only get to talk about inclusivity and diversity, which opens up every closed community to invasion from the outside, and it's never said that they get to be exclusive. They get to say no to certain elements, you know. And so that is what's left out of this equation over and over. You're not being inclusive. You're not being inclusive. Well, we also get to be exclusive. We also get to be non-diverse and homogenous and to like our own character, our own nature. That's what this country was about. What the state is doing right now is breaking down all those boundaries so that any nice, warm, closed community can now be invaded from the outside without any defense. Because as soon as you say no to this, as soon as you say no to modern architecture, you're a racist. You're a bigot. That's what's going on. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, I would like to speak. Thank you. I have a statement here that I want to read. Can you hear me okay? Okay. My name is Sherry Williams, and I am here to make a public statement in support of David O'Neill. When Marianne Schickenstance chose to make accusations regarding David's belief without evidence of such belief, it was wrong. When Marianne chose to make a remark that was harmful, hurtful, and offensive to David and others, it was wrong. When Marianne chose to equate a difference of opinion regarding architectural style to a belief about particular ethnic groups, it was wrong. Therefore, I believe that the right thing to do is for Marianne to make a public apology to David. Thank you.
I'm Janice Bradner. I wasn't able to be here at the last meeting, but when I heard about this, I was absolutely appalled because I have no idea how design preferences have anything to do with discrimination. I don't think we have any empirical data that shows that that designs are denied because of religious or sexual preference or racial differences. And, you know, without that kind of data, it's really hard to make the kind of statements that Marianne made. And, you know, our leadership in Carmel is very respectful, and I would expect that same respect for Marianne, and I'm not seeing it. And in my opinion, given the statements that Marianne has made, she at least owes David an apology and perhaps should consider stepping down. Thank you.
Hi, Stephen Engblom. I was at that meeting last time, and unfortunately, I think that the way that this is being brought up feels to me like it's being taken out of context. I think there were a lot of powerful emotions going on in that meeting, which I'll make a second statement. First, though, I do want to just express that I feel like sometimes things can get taken out of context, and I think that's exactly what's happening here. I think there were David made I felt very proud of some things he said earlier in the meeting about being an LGBTQ person in the community. And I felt like Marianne was actually reinforcing your argument later in the meeting. So I don't know, you know, sometimes things can be taken out of context. And I just feel like personally that the way that the heated emotions that are being brought to this meeting represent to me a tactic that's unfortunately pervasive in our society today, where people are bringing up things as a wedge issue and taking away energy from the technical work that needs to be done, which is to develop these design guidelines. And I think that there is a long tradition in the world of actually isolating modernism as a fascist tool. That was a fascist argument, and that's what happened. And so if anybody's interested in that history, I'm happy to talk to you about it. But unfortunately, there is a very clear example of that in the past 100 years where that did happen. And I think, you know, the reason why I moved to Carmel is because it was a community founded by artists that are open to creativity. And I think that the way that style is currently being handled in the design guideline directly allows the town to ensure that good quality, no matter what style, is delivered to our community. And you know, I personally think that all of the arguments about modernism should also be applied to things like Tuscan, because there's a lot of really awful examples of historic bad design. So I would just encourage anybody that's talking about the charm of the community to really, think hard, because I feel like this is really taking away from the efforts of what the town has to get done, which is these design guidelines. And I'd really love it if everybody could find a way to actually realize that some of the statements being made are just the opposite sides of the coin, because I think everybody wants to have good quality architecture, no matter what the style. And unfortunately, I feel like that realization is that we're all maybe closer to the answer than we realize. And I just would hate to see, two people who are very passionate about this and have spent a lot of time participating in this process. My feeling was that I thought it was interesting, because I walked away from that meeting last time thinking that you were both supporting the same argument. So I would just ask everybody to pause, take a breath, not be so dramatic about things, because we really have a very important process that we're working on. So thank you.
I've been asked to read a couple of statements that were sent in, people who had seen the video or seen the statements and wanted to express their feelings. This is from Graham Norton. Absolute astonishment at the completely misplaced racist statement made by Marianne Chickenstance towards David O'Neill's totally innocent remarks at the recent Design Traditions meeting. I can only presume Ms. Chickenstance, having reviewed David's statement, has the good grace to formally apologize for her slight on Mr. O'Neill's exemplary character. This was hardly an incentive for the residents to get involved. Yours, Graham Norton. I also have a statement by Tony Seaton that's longer, and I won't read it. I'll just hand it over. But also just my own thoughts on it. Marianne had said she'd lost sleep over what had been said at the meeting before, and then started in on her talk, which to me was jaw-dropping. And I have also lost sleep. And I think to equate Jews and blacks and Hispanics and whatnot with preferences for design is a leap that I cannot make. It just seems totally irrational at best. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Actually, I'd like to make a comment. I wasn't here last time, so I'm really wondering now everything that happened. But I gotta say, as someone who lives in a modernist house, and I'm part of these conversations, and I keep hearing everyone say, no, nothing can be modern. And we've had modernism in this town forever. We have a Frank Lloyd Wright house. We have the Henry Hill houses. We have the Mills houses. It's not just modernism, it's our modernism. We developed this own Central Coast modernism. People come from all over to see our modernism. It's part of who we are, it's part of this town. And so when people say you can't have any of that, and I speak for the town, you gotta do what I say, I feel like a minority. I feel like that. I don't like people telling me what I can do and not do. I didn't like, Carol, when you said, if people don't like that, they should just leave. Well, you did say that, you did say that. It's recorded.
They can build other places, they can build in other places. That's a little different than they can just leave.
But maybe I misunderstood, I'm sorry. But my point is really, you're saying that, and yet that modernism has been here. The town that you're thinking maybe doesn't exist. We have written in our bylaws even a diversity of architecture. We've had eclectic and diverse architecture since we've been a town. In fact, I just get offended when I hear people say, you don't belong here, or you should go someplace else, or you can't build here, it has to be this way, we can't allow this. That's not what we're about. I feel offended when I hear that. When the two of you were in my living room and told a story about the people in the glass house being physically harassed by neighbors until they decided to leave Carmel, and you had smiles on your faces, I almost asked you to leave my home. It scared me. I thought that was very offensive. I feel like it's becoming an extremist issue that nothing can be modern. And it scares me. It scares me to see extremism like that in Carmel. So I can see how people would react negatively and even emotionally to this behavior. It's just my impression. I'm not trying to attack you or offend you, but I'm telling you that's how I feel when I hear you speak and when we communicate with each other. I feel like I'm being attacked. I feel like I'm in the minority. When you say we got 75% versus 25% so we can tell you what to do, I get offended by that. And I do think about minorities. Neil, I'm sorry, but that survey is a joke. I don't give you I just don't think you speak for Carmel. I don't think that you even speak for your own organization. A couple meetings ago, I even showed you an essay on your website by Dale Byrne that talked about how modernism can fit into Carmel, and you rejected that. So to me, I don't think you speak for anyone but yourself. I'm sorry, but that's just the way I feel, and I feel that way by speaking to members of your own organization and even seeing what's written on your own website. So if you want to come here and speak for yourself, I think that's okay, but when you claim to speak for others, I just don't buy it. Everyone has their own voice. They can come and speak for themselves. They don't need you to do it. Sorry.
Anyone on the committee have committee members, comments, announcements?
I would just briefly respond to your comments. First of all, I want to say that my response was not even to your comment, and if you listen to the tape, I actually thanked you for your comment at first. You know, my statement was in reaction to the previous meeting, where it was said that people who want to live in a modern house should live somewhere else. That was, you can listen to the tape, that was actually said. And that is what I reacted to. Because every fascist movement in the world has started exactly like that, with the forbidding of modern art, with the forbidding of modern architecture, with the forbidding of certain books, and that is how it starts. And it also hinders us from the actual work, and that's what has been it has taken up all the oxygen in the room. And if we would just acknowledge if there are two sets of facts, you can never work. If we would acknowledge the fact that we have a tradition of contemporary architecture in this town from the start of this town, just what David also just spoke about, and there's data that we can send how many mid-century houses there are, in comparison to traditional homes. If we could acknowledge that, then we could get started at saying what fits, what is good architecture, what fits in the town, how can we craft the design guidelines to avoid what I agree with spurred this initial movement. There is a proliferation of really, really bad modern architecture, and it is really offensive, and usually bad modern architecture is a lot worse than bad traditional architecture. Usually, it just sticks out more, it's usually more offensive. And I agree with that, and that is what we should actually work on to try to avoid that. So it had my statement, and I stand to that, because I think that is exactly how it starts. It always starts with the forbidding of art and architecture and books. That's how extremism always starts. And I think you have to call it out, and you have to, face that. And what we actually want to do is prevent bad architecture that doesn't fit into this town. And that there's a lot of it lately, I fully acknowledge. And David, my statement was a reaction to a previous meeting, which I actually said. I said I had contemplated on the previous meeting, and I was very disturbed by what was said. And I think you can listen to the tape. David was here when that was said, and it had nothing to do with the statement that you had made in that particular meeting.
Mr. Chair, since we haven't moved on
Thank you. I'm in a state of shock. I've never. I came back to Carmel in 1959. I started working within the government, little positions representing in late 60s. I've been to an awful lot of meetings. I've seen a lot of problems discussed. I never have been to a meeting like this. We've had when I was the mayor, we had to let 2 planning commissioners go because of things like this. It was handled over. We kept moving forward. But people's tried to come together, and like your statement, by the way, people worked very hard not to be caustic and accusatory. They worked really hard in this city. This is a breakdown. This is a breakdown. I'm in shock. I don't care what side you're on. Let's be civil, get the thing solved. The committee's job is to get things done for the general plan. Let them do their business. If there's a problem between people, there's an office over there. Go sit down and talk. But in a public meeting, I'm in shock.
Our chair back.
I think I missed something, is what I'm.
Can I just make one statement really quick?
Yeah,
So maybe Doug, since
Doug?
you were sitting
Okay.
in his chair, could you just catch?
sorry I was
where
late.
we're at?
Sorry I was late.
Close out.
I just want to say that, I do apologize if, my bringing this here is inappropriate to some people, but I was advised that this is what I was supposed to do by an appointed official and also by an HR consultant that I spoke to. So I'm just doing what was suggested professionally to do, and I was told that this can't be discussed in private because it was said at a meeting. So the offensive remarks, no matter what they intended below, were offensive. And I just leave it at that.
I'll just jump to where we're going to go. It's been a long journey since April of '22. We're getting down to crunch time. We're getting ready to send something to the Planning Commission. And so passions are going to flare, right or wrong. And so I think the committee's job is to move forward. We've got the drafts before us. We love your participation, so please partake of those and we'll move on. There were no announcements from the committee. Mary Ann made a comment, so we are on number 4 for Brandon.
Sure.
Sorry I'm late, everybody, and or maybe I'm not sorry I'm late. But I certainly, whatever happened, I'm sorry that if feelings were hurt or and anyway, I'll move on. It sounds like it's been resolved. But I did have an announcement to just compliment the staff on the housing work the other night. It was very, it was really amazing to see the detail of how this is going to work and just the research that went into helping the community understand where we are with it. So anyway, it was a very positive meeting, and I hope folks, if they didn't attend, can watch it on the tape and learn and look at the slide deck, et cetera. Okay, so receive an update from staff.
Thank you. So not too many updates, really. I want to talk more about, what's coming up next. The chair and I sat down and went through the brevity drafts that this table had been working on. She and I had all of our notes there on the table. We were spread out downstairs for a couple days for multiple hours going through, and that's what everyone has today. That's what was on the table when everyone came in. So what that's going to be used for is moving on to the next step, as Doug mentioned. So we're going to be going to City Council on June 6th to show them those brevity drafts, get some feedback on the format, the direction, looking at it compared to or alongside of the February draft that came out, and really, seeking some high-level policy direction. In this meeting, I've mentioned that I have some concerns about the usability if this were to just stand on its own. So maybe, there's a melding of the two. This started off as a thought exercise, the brevity drafts, and so maybe it's used in a way to make the February version better. And there's some middle version that exists. I don't know, but that's really what we're going to the City Council for in a couple weeks. Because they're ultimately the ones that set us off on this journey back in April, as Doug pointed out. So that's really what the work product has been lately, has been working with the chair and getting these up to speed with what we think has come out of the weeks of review of these, so that when we go to City Council for that direction, they can see what this concept and thought exercise has produced. So that's really all I have, unless anyone has any questions for me.
Well, I would just add to that what Brandon and I agreed to do at the last meeting and did in the last few days is go through all the notes that we had taken during community sessions. I want to add the caveat that a number of you online and here in the room probably have communicated to us over the months with written comments that we have not had a chance to completely triple check whether it's all been incorporated or in what way it is compatible or not compatible. So I don't know, I apologize for that. It just is, this is part of this exercise if you want to look at that also, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be looked at, and at least I will look at it. We were there doing it for several hours, and there was only just even getting the community public input in, that's how long it took. So what you see here is in red in these two documents is what Brandon and I, who, perhaps surprisingly had very almost identical notes.
I don't think
that's not surprising. We must be very good note takers. So, it was pretty easy to help each other remember what our notes meant and what people were saying in the room, and that's what we did here. That's what this exercise represents. What's not here yet, to Brandon's point, is something that I think Word does for free. David, I was just thinking of your offer earlier this year. I think we could add an index, and it might be useful to add that. And Okay. So I think in order to understand how this format would really work, even because it's still missing the parts of the older draft, the February draft, that are sort of atmospheric, that are not here because they're meant to be in the appendices. It's also missing an index, which the other draft didn't have either, but which would be helpful, I think, to understand the full usability of the thing. So perhaps that can be prepared before the meeting. I'm not sure. I'll take a stab at it. I'm not putting anything on your plate.
Yeah.
Okay, so
let me comment on that, because I always try to make sure that expectations are set, because this, I've been saying all along, like I do have some concerns about the usability of this, just from a staff. That's part of my role in this committee is telling you guys how this will actually be used by the staff and what I think the professionals that we interact with on a regular basis, how they would use something like this. So I do have some concerns about not having window specific sections, or a good example that the chair and I noted when we were downstairs working on this is that skylights appear in different sections of this. So that does still give me some pause, and I understand that the glossary or an index would solve some of that. So that's part of the conversation with council, and anybody that shows up, hopefully a lot of people show up to have a conversation about how this format shakes down, and that's why I think there may be a middle version. But certainly all this work that's been put into this, all the great language massaging and realizing that we don't need duplication all over, whatever the final format is, I think this has been a very fruitful exercise. I just want to make sure that that's out there, that there's no for sure that this is the final format of the design guidelines.
Okay, so this is 4. We're on 4. So let's go to number 5, and we can talk about the item at hand.
I'm gonna go let Sebastian be the host. I gotta go to my computer in my
Okay.
office. Just give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay. As you can see, we can just happy to walk us through this. There's not as much as you might think, I guess. I think after all these months, but maybe it is different enough. On the very cover page, we just have added various appendices that have come up in our discussions as ideas for what we need to have in there. Okay, David, hold on.
I just wanted to address the word restraint that comes up on this cover page, because when you look up the word, it says an act of restraining, the state of being restrained, a means of restraining, a restraining force or influence, a device that restricts movement, a restraint for children, riding cars, a control over expression of one's emotions and thoughts. And I just don't think that that's a good word, because it doesn't really evoke what it is what we're trying to accomplish. I think that a good word potentially for you to consider is suitability, the quality or state of being especially suitable or fitting. So I think that might work, but I'm open to suggestions. I just don't think restraint has a good definition for what we want.
The 3.0.0 deals with suitability, and I think the others above it do, but I don't know. Restraint is up for discussion. Do folks? We could just say with modesty. Period. I don't know if people have strong feelings other than David about 5.0. As you recall, that used to be simplicity, which is the what was running throughout this document, and we had long discussions about replacing it with this word. But there could be another word. I think suitability does not fit with all the upper ones are about suitability. So this is about something else. It's about being being modest, I guess. So if anyone has any comments on that one.
I think Don was particularly concerned about this at one point, that architecture should not be busy. And busy, with a lot of gratuitous ornamentation, building envelope and so forth, that it should be. That's how we got here, is we didn't want houses to look gratuitously overdone just to make a statement. And so many of our original cottages, if you see the pictures of them, they're extremely simple. And so that was where we were going, is just to keep the architecture and the accoutrements that might be added to it in a more of a simple way than an overdone, busy, gratuitous way. So is that what you said?
I don't remember.
Oh, I do. I do. Because I agree with you.
I've got my thesaurus open now. Understatement, especially of artistic expression, is one of the definitions of restraint. I think that's what was meant. Understatement. Yeah, but that's what restraint means in the usage of art for artistic expression. So I think that's why we landed on it. There may be better words, but I think, just so you know, that's what it was once intended.
I wonder if it's funny for a town so proud of Comstocks. It's hard to say that a Comstock piece of architecture is not, it's anything but restrained, right? It's it's beautiful and it's very poetic though, right? So maybe I think what might want to be said here, instead of another adjective, maybe we just say design every building to respect the context and with modesty and respect for context, something like that.
That's too earlier. Just look earlier.
Okay, well then maybe we don't need 2 adjectives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
This conversation's kind of
So just eliminate?
So we're like, just modesty. Be modest. Okay. All right. So flip to page 2. To create connectivity with adjacent properties, leave the right-of-way as an unpaved, this is, sorry, bottom of page 2, 1.2.5, oh, you can see it in the red, sorry. To create connectivity with adjacent properties, leave the right-of-way as unpaved natural forest floor with an informal edge consisting of trees, naturally occurring vegetation, and organic surfaces such as pine needles. And you can see what Brandon and I took out, the idea being that we had missed the fact that there actually could be plants naturally growing under the trees, not just dirt. So this is basically saying kind of leave the forest floor alone. It might have vegetation on it too that's naturally occurring. And then in the following one right after it, when adding plantings, use only naturally occurring natives to the Carmel forest, informally arranged. So this is slight change to the verbiage, just to acknowledge that there are naturally occurring plants there on the forest floor and that we're sticking with that palette and not being alarmed if we see naturally occurring plants. Any thoughts or comments on that one?
I know we are going into the details right now, but can I ask a general question? Does it, I mean, we all were striving for getting a landscape ordinance. So does it make sense to even do this kind of detail now? Shouldn't all of that, what we see right here, be in the landscape ordinance, and in this design guidelines just have a reference to the landscape ordinance? Otherwise, I think we end up with the same thing that we were just trying to work so hard on, that things don't appear in different places, and then it's hard to, you know, keep things consistent. And a really big chunk of this is all landscape. It should all be in a landscape ordinance. It has nothing to do actually with building design guidelines.
So just so everybody knows, we have a number of places in this document where there's an underline. That underline is often taking us to regulatory documents. So if it has to do with design and it is better covered in a regulatory document or more detailed, covered in more detailed way, then we link to it that way. I don't think there's an instance where we completely eliminate things that are design related, landscape or building design related, just because they're covered elsewhere. I don't think there's a single instance where we just say see municipal code or see landscape ordinance or see something else. We just have a little bit of a, now it's possible, this is just my opinion, that this would be shortened once we have a landscape ordinance, and because we see that it's really not necessary, you can get to it in a briefer way. I don't think this is particularly long, but I think we should not leave out design-related items from this guideline. Once we see the landscape ordinance and what it covers, then I think the comment makes total sense. You might say, oh, this is like now very redundant. But right now, that's all we have, A. B, we don't have a normal approach of ignoring design issues here just because they're covered elsewhere. And that idea of comparing the regulatory and the design guidelines we have not done in this committee at all for anything, which was partly the staff's desire to put a firewall there. But that comparison of the regulatory documents to this has not yet happened, if it is going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with your comments, especially since we have no concept of what this ordinance is going to end up like, the landscape ordinance. I mean, and the council's made it very clear that landscape ordinance is their baby, you know, and we can make some comments, but we're not in charge of it. So I think we should leave what's in here, basically, Marion, because we have no idea what the landscape ordinance is going to look like and whether we're going to like it, even though we are the ones who asked for it. So I think we have appropriate protection here, and our thoughts are properly expressed. And so I would just say, let's leave everything the way it is for now and wait and see what happens with the landscape ordinance.
Since this is such a big effort, right, do you think it makes sense to finalize this before the landscape ordinance is done? Or would it make sense to actually, you know, hold at a certain point and wait and then finalize it?
Might be a staff question.
It may naturally happen that way, honestly, because I mean, we've all seen, like, the process, the Design Traditions 1.5 project has taken a much different timeline than what I think we initially thought, for good reason, because we've spent more time, we've gotten way deeper in. So it may naturally happen that way already. I mean, this isn't going for adoption to the city council next week. This is going for a policy direction. So we're a long ways away from anything actually being adopted. So we may have to make that decision in a few months. Like, if this does pick up some speed and it becomes ready for adoption, then we can say, okay, let's hit pause before adoption, finish the landscape ordinance, and then do it all at once. But I don't think we're at that crossroads right at that moment, because there's no risk of this being adopted in the next month or two. Yeah.
Don.
I hate to change the subject, but the title of this item we're on is Receive Update on Consultant Work Products. No, may I ask?
We'll go down to 5.
Well, I'm still going to ask the same question. What's the status of Roy Winter? What's he doing? You know? And then also, how about the landscape ordinance? When is the time?
So the question was, what is Nori Winter doing, and what is the status of landscape ordinance? Nori's mostly on pause right now because the steering committee took the February 9th draft that he put together and pulled this out and has been working on this thought exercise. He's been attending the meetings or having someone come or watching the videos. I've been meeting with him regularly, keep him updated. But really this exercise is at this table. With the steering committee and the community. So he has also been working with staff, you know, like we're ready to come, you know, in one of the upcoming meetings to present the buildable envelope, the 3D. So we're ready. We've been working on that in the background as well. So that's what he's been working on. With respect to the landscape ordinance, I'm working with Davey to get some examples of previous landscape ordinances and work that they've done, so we can, you know, put that out there and let people see what their work looks like. And then I need to go to city council and start talking about contracts and things like that.
Does that answer your question, Don? I'm sorry you don't feel well. Okay, so this was all 1.2.0, that big chunk. I don't hear major objections to these tweaks. The 1.3.0 section, you know, it's basically some wording changes, clarifications that were noticed during the meetings. The big changes in this page on page 3 is 1.3.3. We entertained temporarily a thought about trying to control views with respect to foliage, and in the end took it out. There was some research that Doug had done about the legal perils of that. So that's where that is. That's all of 1.3.0. I don't know if anyone has comments on that section. Yeah, can we sorry, can we
Pass it down.
I just wanted to give a shout out and a big compliment to having the photos. I think the visual element of explaining what the words say is just so helpful. But I'm a nitpicker sometimes, and I did notice that the one in the middle is backwards. So when the final draft is made, maybe correct that. Just needs to be flipped. Thank you.
Being left-handed, that's how I make my check marks.
Thank you. And I just, for those that haven't been here, so we've had a conversation about all of the images throughout the document. At one of the upcoming meetings, one of our tasks as a group is going to be to go through and mark which pictures maybe even need to be retaken, or if we're missing an image that we think should be conveyed. We have some very kind local volunteers that are professional photographers that have offered to help us with that. So we're not done with the picture part of this effort yet, but thank you for pointing that out.
Yes, thank you, Sherry. Okay, so any other comments on this section, which is, other than 1.3.3, not really substantively changed? We can do it, I guess this is a good way to do it, kind of chunk, subheading by subheading. So 1.4.0, no changes. That doesn't mean you can't comment, by the way, but this is what we're concentrating on. 2.0, the 2.1.0, nothing changed. Yeah, go ahead.
Could somebody explain to me about green roofs? Are green roofs, like the house, I think, on Camino Real, that has plants on the roof? That's it?
That's a green roof, yeah. Not just the color green.
No, no. Yeah, I think we should think about that carefully because that requires someone to be there all the time and take care of, and it's a possibility. It's a nice thought, but yes, if it turns into a brown roof or weeds, even worse. So I don't know how much we should be encouraging green roofs.
There's one on 7th that's very beautiful. It's not, I don't think it's in the city limits, or is it? I don't know. It's really cool, on the garage.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
My understanding, Melanie, of green roofs, which is not extensive at all, is that the foliage is selected in such a way that it is basically self-maintaining, self-irrigating, self-maintained. Marianne might know. You know a lot about it? Okay, Marianne.
I know a lot about green roofs. So they are automatically irrigated. That's the only way you can keep the plants alive. So there's a membrane, then there's a sponge basically that's always wet, and that's what, and 4 inches of soil that makes, you can pretty much grow anything on it up to about 18 inches in height. So I had an herb garden, for example, and we also grew tomatoes up there. So, and in terms of, I don't think there's such a thing as a self-maintaining garden. So I think the same thing, weeds do grow. So the same thing that's for your front yard, you have to maintain it. Is the same for the roof. Yeah, you do have to weed it. And it's not going to die because it's irrigated. Correct. Yeah. So if you did just grasses, for example, something like that, then you have something that's the closest probably you get to self-maintaining. But you also have to cut those then once a year so that they look good again.
I'm glad you brought it out. Okay, so that is, now we're down to 2.1.0 about nestling, and this has nothing either. That's new, but but still, any comments are welcome. 2.2.0 about the natural contours of the site. This was just a change to the wording, which is in some ways more strict. The angle of repose is actually not as steep as I had remembered. Brandon and I changed it to, if a stable planted slope cannot be created, then you use so in other words, what we're trying to do here in 2.2.3 is basically keep things as natural and planted as possible, and trying to eschew, terracing or walls wherever possible. But if you really can't do a stable planted slope, then of course we have the preference of the terraced thing. Before, the angle of repose is actually, you can actually plant slopes that are far steeper than an angle of repose, is what we realized through conversation. So this is more strict. Okay, let me give it, you're next.
That's a question. Are there somewhere maximum wall heights regulated?
Maximum terrace walls, like retaining walls?
Yeah, so this first wall to the street, is there a maximum?
Yeah, there is. It's in the zoning code. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but yeah, the heights are regulated in the zoning code.
Maybe we could get an underline in there, I'm not sure.
I'm just wondering about the sequence of our numbering on this. We start out with follow this site's natural contours. Then shouldn't we put 2.2.2, minimize construction on steep slopes, and then follow with the ones that are immediately above it? Because that's what we wanted to do is right. Minimize construction on slopes. Right. Yeah, so it should be, I think and those should be flipped. Anyway. Yeah, exactly. So, and then maybe you want to put 2.2.1 right after the minimize, and then put steep building height, foundations, yada yada.
Okay, hold on. Let's just, because the numbers are wrong, and I
yes.
noticed that. We're saying
here.
Here.
This one.
Here, give me the mic. Help Okay.
So.
Yeah, the very short one goes to the top.
Right.
2.2.1
And then
becomes,
this 2.2.1 goes right after it.
Okay.
In other words, stays where it is. And then the
step building height becomes 2.2.3, and then we properly number 2.2.3 to be 2.2.4. Okay, is everybody following that? So,
I have a question though on that.
yeah, hold on.
So, first, just a comment that our town is a steep slope that goes down to the ocean, and so many of our lots are steep slopes. And the second part of that is almost every single one of those lots is already built. So when we say don't build on steep slopes, who are we regulating?
We're saying minimize construction on steep slopes. We're not saying don't do it.
But what is, I'm saying we live on a steep slope that goes to the ocean, and most of those steep slopes have already been built on. In fact, how many vacant lots do we have on steep slopes that we would attempt to regulate with this rule?
So, believe it or don't, there actually are vacant lots in town. There's not a lot of them, but there are also many lots in town with smaller homes on them where the back part of the lot or back quarter, we actually have language in our zoning code about 30% slopes and things like that. So this pairs with what's in our zoning code. If you're going to be expanding the footprint of a home, it's a design guidance of work your design around those steeper parts of your slope. So don't think as global as the entire city, think more site-based, that it's stay away from those steep sloped areas of your site as well. Because there are still plenty of exposed steep slopes in the town, believe it or not.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, any other thoughts on this is 2.2.0 about natural contours? Thank you, Melanie, for catching that issue. I don't see anything. Okay, now we're on to 2.3.0 about subordinating your parking facilities to the house and site. There's nothing changed there. 2.4.0, we're talking about reducing pavement areas. 2.5.0, blending private landscape with the public right-of-way. This is, oh, sorry. There's no red here at all, so now I'm at the top of page 8. But of course, as always, comments are welcome for anything. I'm going to send this over to you.
So I know that our mayor and myself, I'll put myself both on the list, are concerned about so many of the garages being right up at or damn near the property line. And is that addressed here at all? I don't know that it is in the 2.3.0.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to a challenge I asked this committee to do maybe 2 months ago. And when we're talking about garages, and you were talking about fencing and gates and that kind of thing. Remember that? And I asked you to go by and look at an example of Fort Casanova. Okay. How many of you did that on the committee? Wonderful. I can sleep tonight.
No, you go ahead.
So to Nancy's question, it is, you see some language in here if you look at like 2.3.2, if detached one-car garage or carport benefits the overall streetscape, the city may determine that it can encroach into the front setback. The city does not allow two-car garages in the front setback. So that talks about it not being a preferred, actually 2.3.1 talks about the preferred location for garages. So, you know, how these guidelines are used and we've continued to structure is that here's our most preferred situation. If that's not possible, then here's the next most preferred. But as you get less preferred, there's more, you have to pass more tests basically. So that's why in the zoning code, there's language about the findings that have to be made in order to allow a garage in the front setback. And I do agree with you, and I've talked with my staff about this. I think that we need to crank those up a little bit to make it harder to get them so far out in front. We've seen the Planning Commission over the last few meetings actually take that approach too. They've been pushing garages farther back into the site for that exact reason, so that you have to be able to get your car totally onto the driveway that's in front of the garage, not hanging out. Because people typically will only build a 200 square foot garage, which unless you drive a Mini Cooper, for the most part, you can't fit in there.
Yeah, actually, one of my few written comments from someone who has never been to the meeting was, could you please get it so there's enough space for someone to park in front of their own garage door? Which you could argue really mostly applies to garages that are closed. So that is a disincentive for those. You could argue that if you have just a protection for your car, then you would never have that issue. So, but we don't really get into that. So you'll see at now if we're in 2.5.0, which is a very important one about blending private landscape with the public right-of-way so that we have a continuous forest. There's an additional one that we came up with very recently, which we think is going to be successful. It relates to this maximum building envelope study that we have to see still. But place front yard enclosures, such as hedges, fences, or walls, farther back from the front property lines as they become more solid, and refer to the maximum building envelope information to determine allowable heights and placements. So this is about that diagonal line we all talked about if you were here. It wasn't very well attended last time, so maybe a lot of you were not here, but we were working on, as Brandon said, the consultant's working on an envelope diagram for structures on the site, and we thought, well, this is a structure on the site, and why don't we have him show us how that might work with fences and things like that. So we will see the particulars of that later, but this is the general concept, if there's any comments on this added red zone here. Nope, people, that was captured well, it sounds like. Okay, so now we're on the lighting issue of 2.6.0. This is not different really, except for adding a couple, like slightly more strict things to remind people that we're not uplighting. That was not shown before. That we, apparently I learned this when I was talking to Brandon, they do a lot of string light enforcement around town. I didn't know that. I thought that's so counterintuitive that I thought, why don't we add it in? So this just those couple tweaks. And with the skylight doing light pollution, we were asking them to be shaded. So. Any comments on night sky stuff?
I'm still on lights. I had suggested, and continue to suggest, and maybe it doesn't have any traction, that we encourage amber lighting where possible, because it's so much softer and more village looking than some of the brighter lights that we're seeing around town.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the same thing. The amber lighting appears more like a flame, like old world lighting, like it would be a kerosene light or something like that. So it communicates old world. At the same time, it's very warm and friendly. I remember when Dan Glosser and I were designing at the general store, I set the policy all amber lighting, and everybody loved it. It was like the fireplaces was. And then they went back to white lighting, and everybody said, you lost it. Anyway, thank you.
I'm glad you pointed this out. This might be something for us to think about. Just so you know, the methodology was Brandon and I worked on the residential first, then we went to the commercial, and then we kind of saw if we were going back and forth. When we got to the commercial, I think we might have done a little bit better job on describing the lighting. And so we could, if people want to look at the commercial page 3, which is 2.3.1, we there have warm white. Now that is a discussion we had. I think we just forgot to bring it into the residential because the underlying municipal code there would then tell you the temperature of the light. And it would be, as we discussed it the last time, on the warm side, which could be like 2,700 K for people who make sense, but that's often the lowest or warmest that you can get in the store. So I think it would get very close to what you're asking for, and that was the intention. But we have to, I think, was that right? Don't you agree, Brandon? We have to copy it back over to the residential and make sure it's similar there. Does that make sense to folks?
Just a comment on that. Light that spills out of a window, for interior lighting, especially if it's a storefront, you might need light temperature that is closer to daylight so that people can properly see the colors of the items in the store. And so I can see how that might spill out. However, for exterior lighting, especially in the evening, like Neil says, I agree that you might want actually a warmer color temperature than you would want to use as your rule for interior lighting that might spill out. So I don't know that you'd want to say those two are locked at the same temperature.
So this is what she was pointing to. That's what's in the commercial side.
Yeah, we're not regulating temperature on interior lighting. I think that's like, not American, un-American. But
In a previous meeting, we were talking about commercial buildings where light was spilling out onto the street in the evening. Okay.
Yeah. So that's this one. This is in the commercial version.
those are two totally different things, but let's wait till we get to commercial for that, if you don't mind. I'm sorry to.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Okay. All I was trying to do is draw your attention to that language about temperature that we can now, including the fluorescent lighting. There's no reason this can't be the same if people agree. The warm white temperatures, which are going to be regulated in the municipal code, and the fluorescent lighting. I don't think Neil wants fluorescent lighting either.
No.
I'm guessing. Okay.
Well, there's some warm. I don't know how warm
on,
you're
Neil.
going to get by saying warm white, right? Because
Hold on,
you're
Neil.
going to get it
Neil.
warm. I'm sorry. So we use degrees Kelvin. Warm light still would not necessarily be amber. As you get into the warmer, it goes towards the red spectrum even more. So the idea with amber is it stimulates flame as opposed to light. But I don't know, can we not say that, or is that too restrictive? Hard to find the light sources for it?
From what I understand, especially since we've moved to these low energy lights, we can only go, I think it's eventually possible, or maybe they do have quite yellow or amber LEDs, but I don't think they're easy to find at this point. So we can go all the way, I think what's easy to find is, and still not the norm, but you can select way into the 2000s, 2700, sometimes 3000, but I don't think you can, if folks can find an amber fixture that works or a bulb that works, I think I don't think it's.
I think they're working on it.
Yeah, no, I think so. But I think this is as close as we can get for right now. Was somebody, you were going to say something, Melanie, yeah?
No, I was just wondering if we're just going to leave this or if we're going to even suggest a warmer type light.
Let's come back to the commercial later, but just to acknowledge that this low lumen standards is not sufficient here at 2.6.1. So we'll bring the temperature over from commercial. Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Carol. So is there anything else in the 2.0 section? Otherwise, we're going to 3.0. Fit every built structure within its neighborhood context. There was a desire to add more structures in this diagram up here, the green, my favorite green planting, not suggestions, but requirements there. Carol?
I'm sorry, I'm backing up to 2.5.4 here. When creating an arbor, maintain a narrow, low, and light scale instead of a tall, wide structure. I agree not to have a tall, wide structure with massive timbers, but I'm afraid we don't want skimpy either. So I think I made a suggestion, maintain a human scale instead of a tall, wide. Instead of light scale, it sounds like it could be skimpy and be fine. You know what I'm saying? With the word light, narrow, low, and light scale. And instead I would put maintain a human scale. I know it's rather than, but at least we juxtapose it with what we don't want.
Any objections to that suggestion? Everybody feel like you want to say something?
Yeah, I just think that we have talked a great deal about human scale in the downtown, and I think that it's a very good idea, Carol, to emphasize human scale everywhere we can.
I don't know if anyone's wed to light. I'm not seeing any looks of horror leaving that word behind?
My only comment is, I wonder if we have to define some of these things better. Like, I agree, Carol, with what you're saying in spirit, and I agree with human scale as well. I wonder, though, if we use words like that so frequently, then they're imprecisely defined. And so when it comes to sitting in a room and approving or not approving a design, it feels squishy, right? Like, oh, that's not human scale. No, this is human. You know what I mean? Like, they're not tightly defined terms. And so I wonder if sometimes we have to put more work into clearly defining what it is we're trying to say.
Yeah, maybe we can put that in the appendix, just to define that word, and maybe a few others, that we're using that are a little bit, squishy. I like that word.
You could define squishy.
Okay, so just to catch Brandon up, folks were not thinking light scale. They were thinking that could be problematic. It's not very well defined, and so there didn't seem to be any objection to changing that to human scale, which was Carol's suggestion, just in the Arbor 2.5.4 line.
I think, though, I'll do a counterpoint to that. I think this is not, because human scale is like, think more about a 9-foot tall doorway. That's what the human scale really is driving at. What I think that this light scale is driving at when talking about arbors is the opacity of it, in a way. This is more about how light does it feel? Like, how transparent is it? Does it feel like lace, or does it feel like a piece of steel? I think that's what this is more driving at here versus the human scale conversation, which is about massing.
Maybe we can have a parentheses there and do a better definition that makes sense to us. Open, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think what's maybe throwing this off is the word scale. I think if we just said, when creating an arbor, maintain a narrow, low, and light/open design instead of a tall, wide structure with massive timbers and other heavy elements.
Yeah, we are sort of mixing terms there. This is really about heavy versus light. Yeah. Okay. All right, good teamwork. All right. So thanks for going back, whoever it was that went back, because that's good to clarify. If no other thoughts on that, we'll go to 3.0.0. This is just, all you see there is a note that folks wanted us another illustration of how to deal with these yards if you have more than 2 things in a row, which you always do. But nothing else in red from 3.1.0 or 3.2.0 or 3.3.0. When we get to 3.4.0, at the bottom of page 11, we have an addition on the next page, 12. Sorry? Everybody's got a... Oh, sorry. So, but again, there's just no red, just so you know. There's no... Okay. Okay.
Okay. I'm looking at the comments I had sent in regard to what each of these says. 3.2.1, locate building volumes to make use of views but not substantially block views enjoyed by others. Great. Keeping the building height low and the building footprint compact to maintain views over and along sides of properties. Do we really want to encourage keeping the building height low? We have so many 2-story places. I don't know. It just seems like it's an overarching comment that doesn't really apply in many cases, where there are a lot of homes that don't have views and there are 2-story structures in front of them, and it's no big deal. So that's a question. 3. Block views enjoyed by others. I'm saying keeping the building footprint compact and just taking out the building height low and keeping the building height low, because sometimes I don't think that applies in many cases in Carmel. And to encourage people to keep building heights low, we've already said keep things modest, and I think it doesn't apply in many cases, I guess.
So just from a practical, like actual, like staff use perspective, it actually does, believe it or not. So we have quite a few instances where, you know, what the Planning Commission sometimes wrestles with and has to, and we've actually included language, or I don't know if, I think it made it into this, but it was in the draft in February that, you know, the maximum height is not a guarantee. That's a ceiling. You know, we keep trying to remind people that just because you can build to 24 feet doesn't mean you're guaranteed to build to 24 feet. So oftentimes what you'll see at a planning commission meeting is someone will come in with a very tall second story plate height, and the planning commission needs language, or the staff needs, when we're doing staff reviews, to lean on saying, okay, yeah, you can definitely show that you can build up to 24 feet, but it would be better if you build to 19 feet and lower your plate height, because you don't need a 12-foot vaulted ceiling in a second story. So we do need this language. It is practical, and we do see this oftentimes when the height of a building becomes a main focus of a planning commission hearing. So I don't think it's irrelevant, and I do think it gets used quite a bit just from my actual experience at planning commission meetings.
Let me make one other comment, which is that this whole section, 3.2.0, is about views between properties. So in your case, just Carol, I think this might be of comfort to you. If there are no views to preserve, then this is not relevant. Okay. So, yeah. Do you have anything else, Carol, before, because I was moving too quickly, I think.
Let's see, where are we now? Let's see.
Well, the next red is 3.4.2.
Okay,
Can we?
3.4.1.
Okay, here, I'm going to give you back the.
3.4.1, provide variety in building materials along a block, and if houses to the immediate sides of a site are constructed of similar materials, use a different material. I thought eliminate the statement altogether, redundant and too restrictive in many cases. I just think of the Comstock Hill and places like that where there are similar and really not very similar, but similar houses in some regards. And I know what that's trying to get at, but I think there are many, for instance, stucco houses that are aligned, or wood houses that are aligned one after another, that give a feel to a street that are not egregious. So that was my recommendation, just to eliminate that statement.
Yeah, we've got several nods around the table. So you're saying, and if the houses to the immediate sides of the site are constructed, we should take that part out. So, in other words, a period at the end of along a block, provide variety in building materials along a block. Yeah, and then period. Okay. You know, Brandon and I had a similar conversation about this when we were looking at the next one, and we took that part out of the next one because the community had asked us to add, at least try on for size, 3.4.2, when using painted or otherwise coated surfaces, provide variety in building color along a block. And because the original language from 25 years ago had to do with these look to your left and right, we included that and then we took it out because it seemed too restrictive. So we're doing the same thing here. If everybody agrees around the table that it's too restrictive to look left and right and be so responsive in that about materials and color. So you guys, I think that's where we're headed, but okay, we see some nods. Forever hold your peace.
Is there a specific bad thing that we're trying to avoid? Like, I know we don't want all the houses the same, but is there something that's sticking in everybody's mind that's horrible that we want to make a rule about? Because it does feel like these are somewhat overly onerous.
I think this is partly, first of all, this is all original language up until the paint. But the paint came up because of many discussions, which you may or not have been here, about the proliferation of a particular type of white and black. What's her name? I actually love this show. The people who have the line at Target, the Farmhouse Modern, the Gaineses, Joanna Gaines houses all over town. So that's what this is all a reaction to. But this is original language. It's the color edition that is a reaction, I think, to that. But
I think perhaps we might make a suggestion, because I'm doing a property that's on a corner, and either side are houses that have similar, siding, and the color would be nice to be that color, but it would just look awful. It would look, it'd be all like an apartment complex or something. So maybe just a suggestion to consider, not, using the same color as your neighbors, I don't know.
Well, I think this gives the planning commission, so look, if we're looking at 3.4.2 now, which is about color, when using painted or otherwise coated surfaces, so in other words, if you have a house like David has, this does not apply to you, provide variety in building color along a block. So a planning commission can say, it looks like if you paint your house red, you're going to make a little apartment complex on the corner. I think this takes care of that. Yeah? Okay. All right. So now we're on 3.5.0, which we all thought we should add from the commercial district. This is a variation of the commercial district language, just about dealing with utilities. Somebody brought this up, I don't know, a couple weeks ago maybe. We thought, yes, why not? Sometimes these crazy utility things happen at the last minute. Brandon was explaining. So now what it says is 3.5.0 is new. It says minimize negative impacts to surrounding properties. That's language from the commercial district. 3.5.1 says fully integrate utilities into the architectural design of the building. That seems reasonable to me. 3.5.2, in cases where full architectural integration is not possible, eliminate the visual impacts of utilities by grouping and shielding them with architectural and landscape elements such as cabinets, walls, fences, or plantings of integrated material and color. Any thoughts? Carol has her hand up, and then it's going to you, Marianne.
I don't know if it should be here or in the codes or whatever, but more and more people are getting generators with loud noises in them, and they are not attractive. And I didn't know if we wanted to address that specifically in here or make it part of the code or what. I know there's some code on it, but.
Yeah, it says fully integrated utilities. I wonder whether we shouldn't say what is meant by that. It's a little hard to know.
Do you have any suggestions?
I really want to ask the question. That's really a question. What did you have in mind? For that, a gas meter out front, or what are we talking about?
Brandon, would you answer her?
So to the generator question that Carol asked, we do have language in our zoning code right now about noise. We have language about the building code actually has language about how close a generator can or cannot be to a structure. That's in there as well. We're working, and that's partially what this section is meant to include. To Marianne's question about what is a utility, a generator, I think, is intended to fall under this utility bucket. And maybe there's a better word than utility. It's, structurally serving something. I don't know what it is, but definitely this generator conversation would fall under the utility. So we would want it to be shielded. We'd want it to not be so offensive.
Do we have a link to it, to the code?
Yeah, perhaps. The question was, should we have a link to the code? And I think, there's definitely a potential for linking here. But I think to Marianne's point, which is a really good one, we need to tease out what, and at least, including but not limited to types of things so that people see where we're going with this. So maybe that's what we need to discuss as a table. I'm going to give it back to Marianne.
In regard to generators, I would like you to maybe consider to not allowing generators altogether. There's technology out there. Everybody can have home battery walls. You really don't need a generator anymore. And when I think how annoying leaf blowers are, even the electric ones, I think maybe that's worth a consideration, not to allow generators in the cities.
I had the same thought, Marianne.
I think it's a great idea because I know that in the storms this year, there was one generator on the corner, and you could hear that thing for blocks. Mm-hmm. And I thought, how in the heck did this thing ever get by staff, And then we walk out on the point, and oh my goodness, you wouldn't have believed how many people out there had generators, and it's just this, here you are in this lovely setting, and all you're hearing is this outrageous level of noise. And so if there's an alternative, I'm all for it.
Yeah, just imagine every house has one when you hear the one. And I just, as for general information, we have every single client we have right now asking for backup power. And we've been successful in, having everybody go to batteries instead of a generator. But I think not everybody knows about it or is knowledgeable about it. So, yeah, that's a suggestion.
Thank you. I think that's a really great suggestion. I love it. And our neighbors down the street have it. We have no room for a generator. We would have had one, but it only lasted for about 8 hours. But I think that you have to sort of turn things off so that you're not using all your stuff.
You mean the batteries only last 8 hours?
The battery wall.
No. You can buy as many battery packs as you want, and I know Tesla is the best looking and the most popular. There are better ones, where you get a lot more out of it. And we can run a battery. You can run a house for a week if you plan it right. Yeah.
So one of the things, I'll say this. So this is a great conversation. It's certainly more at the policy level. With the city council would have to say we don't allow generators anymore. But I'm actually going through this personally in my house right now. You can combine solar with batteries, and Marianne's totally right. Tesla's a very sexy product, but it's definitely not the best battery out there for your money. But the problem is that when we think about these types of regulations, we also have to consider your typical gas generator by a company like Generac or natural gas generator. It is a more affordable solution for power than the battery system and solar is right now. I do think that that's probably where we're going to see it go in the future, and the batteries are going to get more and more affordable. To stack them up to have that week long of power is not a cheap endeavor, but it definitely is possible. So it's something that I can bring forward. That would be more of a building code adoption type of thing when we get to there. But I'll socialize that with my team, start bringing it up, because I'm all for it too. I think it's a great idea where we need to go, because it also is less pollution.
So maybe as an interim, real quick, maybe as an interim idea, Brandon, the generators cannot be anything but temporary. So in other words, that you would design a building that has a permanent reliance on a generator so that you cannot do this switch to battery is a problem. I don't know if that's what people are doing. No, I know. No, I'm not saying for here. But I'm just, since we're on the policy discussion, and also I wanted to ask Marianne this. My understanding is obviously, technically, it is possible to gather power in your battery even off the grid and leave it there, not having to have solar also. So have any of your clients done that? Okay, all right, just so people know, you don't have to do the solar installation to have the battery thing.
But that's the only way to power the battery with the power. True.
So I was just going to make a suggested edit for 3.5, because good conversation, but it just made me realize that maybe this bullet point, does this also include services and utilities, like trash cans and things like that? Because maybe this should say minimize negative impacts of services and utilities. And then that would help support, with the right list that was suggested earlier, like explaining what services and utilities are in here. And then just while I have the mic, that last conversation was really good, but I just made me realize, do we cover solar panels in here anywhere? I'm sorry if I don't remember it.
We don't, because we can't restrict them.
I'm not suggesting restricting them, but can we say anything about design guidelines? About I'm not sure what the rule is about not. You're not allowed to bring it up in this context? I like to be controversial.
No, it's a good question. The solar panels are basically ministerial now. And so it gets problematic when you start having discretionary things like design guidelines for what solar panels look like.
I know Barbara Livingston had a lot of passion about people hiding their garbage cans. And so if we put services in this as well, it really takes care of that issue. She had a lot of passion about that.
Here comes
one thing we need to really think about in this community, and we discussed it earlier, we need to be stressing trash enclosures more than we are, because in my walking, all I see is a sea of trash cans. People aren't at home. They're someplace else in the world. And their trash bins are sitting out. And some of them don't even have enclosures. And so I think we need to really, if we're sitting around talking about aesthetics, the worst thing to me is walking up and down the street and seeing a bunch of garbage cans for 6 months because the people are only there maybe once a year. So we need trash enclosures, and I brought that up on the list of things for you.
Private list here?
Oh, yeah, it was, yes, it's addressed to you. I only did it a week ago.
Yeah, we talked about that before, and I think that the reason why there are none is because they're discouraged by the current design guidelines, right? So they're not allowed right now. So that's why we see the trash cans all over town. So I don't know where that idea came from, but it's really important. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I built the fence and hide it behind it.
So where I believe that came from was that building a trash enclosure creates a feature, and the trash cans live towards the front of the property. I think originally trash cans were supposed to live in the back of your property, and the trash company is supposed to go onto your property, get them from the back of the property, and put them back on the back of the property, so you don't see them at all. So I think that's where the design guideline of not building a trash enclosure came from, was it would encourage people to have them in the front of the property, but practically that's not how it's working. So. Right, and sometimes there's no space in the back to put it, especially if we're going to start seeing ADUs and things like that. So that may be something, as the world changes, as things function differently, you have to design for the function that currently happens. So it's something for everyone to think about.
I think it's bizarre, frankly, that we haven't discussed this before. So I'm glad it's on your private list, Melanie. Yeah, of course. She just handed it to me under the table. No, we're gonna look through it. But trash enclosures, that doesn't mean we can't say we don't want to see your trash cans. I mean, so this is the same topic. Whoever brought this up, I think is correct. This should be part of things we're trying to block from view. Now, whether it ends up migrating into something, if your property does not have room on the side, then this is the type of enclosure you have to have. Then that I don't know. You'll tell us when that happens in terms of the code. But I mean, it is an epidemic of people not understanding that we are paying through the nose to have folks come into our properties, into our backyards. Oh, you've got a diagram?
The new voice that's coming out to members. There's a chide here. It says, please honor the no waste containers, green waste, are left out at the street curb or on private or public property visible from the street in the residential districts of Carmel-by-the-Sea. Check out municipal code, blah, blah, blah. Then the next one is, there's a cheers, kudos to all of the residents who keep their waste containers in their concealed areas and let the green waste teams do what they are paid to do.
Okay, so the CRA knows the policy and knows what we're paying for, and I am constantly ticked about that. But I think it is we can certainly add something about concealing the trash enclosures as part of this. It is certainly exactly in the and we just added this 3.5.0, so we're building it up. I think it's a good, and whether it'd be great if everybody could keep it on the side or the back. But
let's go back to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to leave it before we go back to the point that Mary Ann brought up actually at the beginning of this conversation about utilities, like what that means. Like we should probably kick that around a little bit. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it is. It is. It includes gas meters. It includes sub panels, main panels, any sort of utility serving the house for it functioning that you can think of. And where this did come from, I shared with Victoria, is that a house will get approved, and this actually is in the same story in the commercial district, but in the residential district, the house will get approved, building permits approved, and the panel will be, the electrical panel will be in the correct place, or the gas meter will be in the correct place, and PG&E or Cal-Am or somebody will come in, one of those utility companies, and for various reasons, and I don't want to speculate, but they'll tell the property owner, no, we can't put it there. We're just going to stick it here on the front of the property because it's going to be easier for us to service it here. And because through no fault of the architect or the builder or anybody on the site, when you have someone from a utility like PG&E or CalAm show up and tell you these things, it feels very official. You think that somehow they have called the city and said, hey, is it okay if we tell these guys to put their utility in the front of the property? And they never do. And so then we don't know about it until there's actually, 4x4 posts going up and a piece of plywood and a panel now on the front of the property. So that's where this is coming from. So it tells people ahead of time, these services are not supposed to be part of like the public presentation of the house. That's where this came from. So utilities is used as a very broad term. So I think we just need some language that says some of these things I just said, but not limited to those things. So that gives us some freedom. Yeah, that's a new, actually, that's really, we actually just dealt with that yesterday in my department. The new tankless water heaters, they mount to the outside of the building versus your classic water heater, which is inside of a closet inside the house. So we had someone that wanted to put it on the very front of the house because that's where the plumbing was the most convenient. And thankfully, they would have been encroaching into the setback. That was the only reason we were able to tell them no, because we couldn't find anything necessarily that would have pointed to that. So having things like this is going to be really helpful. It is. So I've been selfishly spotting things in here throughout this whole process. I know we beat our heads against the wall all the time.
Good. Perfect. Well, this is great. So this is the 3.5.0, again, is new. We thought, oh my gosh, why is it only in commercial? We've brought it over, and now if there's any other thoughts that come up, the trash is a great thought. It's perfect for right here. We don't have to exhaust it right now, but just keep your thinking cap on that. We can move over to 4.0. There's no red until, okay, hold on.
So I have actually been reading the general plan. It's long. And I think that it sheds some light on this situation. Okay, so it talks about, it refers about Carmel's established character. So it says, forgive me for reading this, but it's important. Carmel stone, local granite, and the frequent use of wood in hand-carved doors, window frames, sills, moldings, roof materials, and signs are all design features that contribute to the village character of the city. These form a contrast to the glass, steel, plastic, and featureless gray concrete so often found in other, more urban cities. So now it goes on to explain the village character. Attention to detail and emphasis on fine craftsmanship can be seen in the varied architecture of Carmel. Local builders have embellished their work with detailing and individual style, which creates a unique and appealing building design. Most of Carmel-by-the-Sea's historic buildings exhibit myriad detailing, some of it intricate and some of it bold. Surfaces are broken up by ridges, insets, decorative tiles, cavities, niches, and abrupt changes of material. Textures exhibit a great variety from smooth troweled plaster, brick, stone, rock, and exposed aggregate to painted, carved, or unfinished wood. Corners often include bevels, bullnoses, and cornices. And then it goes on to say how to apply this established character. It says, conservation allows change and new construction as long as it is consistent with established character. This approach is appropriate for new buildings, remodels, facade changes, and public way improvements. So I would say that the general plan supersedes design guidelines, and therefore we should add this verbatim into the design guidelines or create a link and say this is how we define it.
So that link there that's in 4.0.0, established architectural heritage, we don't have a decision on where that link goes, but it could go there. It could also go to, there could be another link that goes to an appendix that might talk about that. So you're absolutely right. I think it's completely compatible with what we have here, and it adds information, or it adds texture to what we're talking about.
Yeah. I'm gonna try not to go too geeky on general plans and zoning codes in here, but it's true that the general plan, in the hierarchy of things, the general plan is your ultimate guiding document. The question is not whether or not it supersedes this. So general plans lay out what you should do, like the bigger overarching policy thing. So it says to preserve the character, basically, is what it says, to boil it down. You can and should, and what the general plan instructs you to do is then take those bigger policy ideas and refine them and make them more specific. So that's what a design guidelines does, or that's what a zoning code does, is it implements your general plan. So the general plan doesn't supersede things. If that was the case, we wouldn't have zoning codes, we wouldn't have design guidelines. There'd be no reason for doing any of this if you're just gonna point to the general plan for everything. The general plan guides you where to start, and then you do things like design guidelines and zoning codes to refine them and be more specific. So the real test is whether or not the design guidelines are consistent or inconsistent with a general plan. That's really your test. So if you felt in your opinion that these were somehow inconsistent with a general plan, that would be an issue to raise. But I don't think it's really practical to say that we don't need this because the general plan supersedes it. Sure.
No, I love the design guidelines. We're doing great work here. I just think that this creates some context. I think, when we look at the words that we use and the way we phrase things, we need to be understanding what we're saying. And so when words are chosen very specifically about talking about the context of things and how this character is, how it's defined, it's just the definition of the words we're using is what I'm saying.
So just 2 comments on that. First, I'm really glad you read that. I think it provides like a true north for us. But so comment number 1, when you were reading, I was thinking it didn't sound like, I wasn't hearing restraint when I heard you reading from that plan. Like it actually sounded like it was talking about busy buildings. So that just goes back to our previous conversation that maybe restraint isn't the right word. But second, what I really liked about it is that it didn't say you have to be this style or that style or this style. It didn't mention that at all. It talked about a diversity of architecture and then mentioned things like natural materials and craftsmanship. And so I think if you look at the buildings that fit into Carmel, regardless of what you think of their architectural style, when they use those materials and when they were built with, when they fit in because of their material usage, when they have true craftsmanship, then that does work. And whether it's the Comstock Cottage or actually my Henry Hill House, I would still say, or even Frank Lloyd Wright, they have that craftsmanship and they use those materials. So I really like having that kind of a discussion versus a debate over which architectural styles fit or do not fit. I think it's far better, and it lets us talk about what makes it fit onto a lot, what makes it fit into Carmel in a much less emotional way.
You will note, as a good segue, in 4.2.0 that there is not here nor elsewhere that we know of in this document the word style anymore. That was a decision that we made communally. So 4.2.0 is where that is most reflected. Just you can look at the wording. It's not different in terms of the intent, but it just is rephrased with different language so that we can put that discussion in a different location in our minds.
Are you envisioning that then there's going to be a bunch of pictures that would represent what our architectural diversity represents? That would be in this appendix. Oh, in the appendix.
I mean, I think we've talked about this before. My suggestion would be we have an adopted, established document called the Historic Context Statement that has really good pictures and really good descriptions and is in the process of getting a final update over this next year to use the formatting we did with the most recent 20 years that were integrated and run that same format through the whole thing. So I think initially, I believe this underline here of established architectural heritage was meant to point to that historic context statement, which is, again, the context statement, what my conversation earlier about the hierarchy of things, it builds off of what the general plan said to do, so it all kind of tiers up to that.
And yes, that you're right. That was the original intention of that underline. And also, this document also would have a sort of an appendix or just a overflow of if there are helpful images that come up. So I think that's taken care of. So but for 4.2.0, there's a little bit of red in each of those things. I don't know if this was just a relocating, but to avoid on 4.2.1, to avoid uniformity in the appearance of speculative development and to promote individual artistic expression. So there's a little bit of a preamble to this one for why you're differentiating a new building's plan, massing, and overall design from that of nearby and abutting buildings. I don't think there's anything really new conceptually here. We added in 4.2.4 that this was a suggestion to not present a commercial or industrial appearance in the residential area. I think that's of help.
What does architectural language in the previous point mean?
Architectural language, that's a good question. You don't want my long professor answer to it, but it basically is about integrating the elements of a building together. So you wouldn't have a brick building. Cohesion, yes. But so you sort of, you choose your materials, you choose the construction technique, and you're consistent about it throughout. That's what we call the language of the building. It's sort of just what is its
You're not doing a grab bag of stuff.
not a grab bag, right? So it's, yeah, I think that a good analogy is that you're either speaking English, or in my case, in my household, Russian, or you're picking a language and you're sticking with it throughout the building. Did you have a question? Thought?
Sorry.
That's okay. We can come back to.
What is commercial or industrial appearance?
Is that what you're going to ask?
There was a question for Brandon. Are you updating the survey for the town, the architecture, for the the historic context statement? Okay, all right.
It got updated. The historic context statement got a small update last year that was funded by a state grant, so we added a 20-year period to it. It ended in like the 60s, and so we brought it out to the 80s basically. And in doing that update, we changed the format so that there's more pictures and there's better a better explanation of those styles, the architectural historical styles. And so we worked with Seth Bergstein from Past Consultants, who did a fabulous job. And so we're gonna run that same format through the rest of the document, so it's all functions the same. So that's our next year's goal on the historic context statement. We gotta wait till the next fiscal year and we get another grant though. So it'll start July, August.
And the other one was the question about the buildings.
Yeah, and Marianne's other question was, what does commercial or industrial appearance mean in section 4.2.4?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the community the answer is we could define it, or we can use it as a tool for the planning commission to say that looks like a downtown building, or that looks like a storefront. I think that, we could have a parenthetical remark there, but it was meant as a tool to keep the residential area looking residential, keep the commercial zone looking commercial, and so therefore, I think the staff and the planning commission can say, that looks like a downtown building.
I don't think we need to define it personally.
Okay. Yeah. So does that, I don't know. But again, if it turns out, I think one of the benefits to this formatting, one of the many benefits, I will argue, is that it feels like it's a more editable document. I think it's been relatively easy for us to edit it and go through and understand what we're at. And so therefore, if the Planning Commission uses this for a year or so and says, oh my gosh, it's creating all sorts of confusion, it would be pretty easy to go in and say 4.2.4 needs another adjective. So I think that's just something to remember in general about this approach. So if we're moving...
I'm
Just a quick question about that procedurally. So that would mean that it would get approved by the council if you went through and made a bunch of edits, your department or the planning commission, they want to make edits and then they get it approved by the council? Okay, cool.
Okay, so we're on 4.3.0, which is about materials. There's a number of, let's start with, right, okay. This is not that different from what we've been discussing. I think there's some clarifications. The main difference is 4.3.6, where we had a large discussion that was, I think, fruitful about exactly what to specify for windows and doors. So we decided that besides authentic natural materials like solid metal and wood, we would also allow recyclable aluminum-clad wood windows, which is basically what everybody seems to want. So, but they're a higher quality of a kind of hybrid. Carol?
Thank you. I'm on 4.3.1. I thought we had done in the standing or flat-seamed roofs, and we're going with, if we were going with metal materials, that they be detailed, tiled or whatever, right?
It's saying that if they have no ribs. Yeah, so I was just looking at that, if you don't mind, saying that they use metal roofs only if they are detailed simply, have no ribs, corrugations, or striations, use genuine field-installed standing or flat seams.
I'm not sure what those are,
And
standing or flat seams.
unreflective, coated, and so on and so forth.
I guess I need clarification on what are flat. Are those the garbage bin lids that I referred to, the dumpster lids?
So I think all you have to do to understand the highest quality of metal roof is a handcrafted zinc roof in Paris. So if you just look at Paris, the Frank Lloyd Wright House also has it's not a vertically, but it is in that tradition actually. It's just reinterpreted on that house. So it's it's a non-commercial kind of field installed look, and it's basically the highest quality of metal roof in terms of its design. I can send you diagrams of the details. I don't know if that's going to help you. I think if you look at Paris.
So it is eliminating so many of the roofs that have cropped up now that are just the flat roofs with the rib down.
No, it does not. It does not eliminate those.
It does not eliminate.
No. Originally, my understanding of the original metal roof prohibition was that they didn't want like farm buildings. So the idea that you would put a corrugated, even though I might like some corrugated metal, they said that's not refined enough. But the metal roofs that have gone up, including the Frank Lloyd Wright building, are of a classic type of metal roof. And so you can get commercialized in that category of roof can get very commercialized. It can have clips and it can have, kind of industrial look. But the handcrafted residential look is what some of the properties are doing properly, I think, but many are not. So this is meant to keep people who are doing metal roofs in the lane of the highest quality of metal roof.
I'm a little confused. Do we really mean to outlaw the traditional standing seam metal roof? I don't get it.
No, it has it there. The traditional roof, handcrafted roof is here.
I thought, have no ribs.
It's within the panels.
Yeah. That may need clarification because the commercial in the actual, for stability, a commercial roof that also uses wider seam widths, therefore they add a profile in the flat pan. And that's a real commercial roof. So, and I think that was the intention of the ribs. I don't know if that's the correct term, maybe, because I think to anyone who isn't in the construction profession, may interpret that as the rib to be the seam. So corrugations, I think, is enough because that is a form of corrugation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that what you might want to add to this is that the standing seam roof needs to be in scale with the building, because if you do the wider pans, that looks really bad. And then if you do just a 12-inch pan, it gets down to this human scale or residential scale.
So we can add the scale issue here if we like. Scale is generally dealt with, that every material you use must be used in the scale of the building all the time. At a human scale, the scale of the building, we can add it here. I don't think there's a problem with that. I think, Marion, you're probably right about this interpretation. The word ribs, though I think is accurate, may be misleading to folks who are not in the business, because you might mistake a seam for a rib. But this is meant to be the inside the panel. A commercial product will often be textured, heavily textured, or crimped, corrugated, which makes it look like a strip mall.
That would be allowed right now, right? That would be allowed, and
Would do the.
and that's also a nice scale.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to put the word scale. We'll remind. No. Ribs is, the confusion is the word ribs. Ribs is not meant to mean seams. If people think it means seams, we'll take it out.
Taking ribs out.
Taking ribs out. Out. Okay, so that, where else were we? Okay, so I thought that the main, so that's clarifying. That's very good. The main change is the 4.3.6 about what the addition of aluminum-clad recyclable wood windows. Any other thoughts on 4? Yes, go ahead.
You may want to rethink the uncoated. What David just shows was a coated roof, and the aluminum coated roof's actually quite nice. And they give you the dark brown color or something that integrates much better than a uncoated metal roof. Because where we are right here, you think would be nice, but you can't use that in the saltine environment. You also can't use Corten on a roof in a salt environment, and therefore you would be left with raw aluminum, which I don't think is what you might like.
So the word we can add coatings here. It says integrated earth toned color. So there you can choose when you specify roof material whether you want the color to be coated and added to the top of the metal or integrated into the metal. The integrated, so if you chose aluminum, it would be anodized. Once you do that, you are keeping the material in a state where it can age. Exactly. Once you coat a roof, now of course it's a popular product, but once you coat a roof, you cannot maintain that coating. You have to hope that it's going to have a great warranty, and at some point it won't anymore. But an integrated color has a patina just like a natural color does. So I don't think it's a major deal. I think, but that is the intent, is to keep in the same framework as naturally patina-ing products. But that's something we can work on if people feel strongly. Any thoughts on that one? I mean, it's you can have a color if it's earth toned. Just find a product that integrates the color. What else do we have here? We can move to 4.4.0, which is manufactured materials. Yeah, go ahead.
Just on 4.3.6, if the house.
Hold on, Nancy.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'll move up. If the house that you have already has vinyl or plastic elements in it, is it to be replaced with the correct stuff, or can you replace it with in kind?
No, if you take your vinyl out, you're putting something else back in. I'll answer that question. That's a standard sort of practice with non-conforming things in general. So if you have something that's non-conforming, when it goes away, you have to make it conform. Yep. There are some exceptions to that. You know, when you have sometimes like non-conforming setbacks or heights, there's a point where you can maintain those, you know, if it's a historic structure or if you're not demoing the entire building. But in your example of a window, a vinyl window, we would make them replace that with a wood window.
But you're not going to come and remove their windows while they're sleeping. So.
Nope. No, we'll do it while they're
Okay, so 4.4.0 is just about manufactured materials. Here, the main changes, besides we landed on the word manufactured, is just the addition, a very clear addition in 4.4.2, do not use petroleum-based architectural elements. That's it. You can put them inside your house if you're where we can't see them, but no plastic on the outside. We made some tweaks to this. I think we added, just so that we weren't stuck on one standard in 4.4.3 of cradle to cradle. That's just an example. We added national and international current ecological standards. That way we can link to that at some point if we land on one, or people themselves as applicants can come forward and say, I decided to make my house LEED, platinum, or whatever they want to do, and we can say that meets, passes muster. The Planning Commission can say that.
You need an action word at the front of that.
Do we?
Use.
Oops. We do need verbs in sentences. Okay. Thank you, Brennan. The other change is in 4.4.4, which was a clarifying comment about textures and finishes, so that when you add them to manufactured materials, you're doing it in a handcrafted way, as opposed to making something look machine produced.
Yeah, good changes. The only thing is, I'm kind of concerned that the ability to handcraft patterns and stuff seems to only relate to concrete. In the first part, when you're talking about just manufactured materials that fake or mimic natural textures or finishes, that includes a lot of different things, but then you say use concrete only with non-uniform handcrafted patterns and stuff. If we're doing something that is not the actual thing, we want it to mimic it and make it natural, right? Or am I missing something? Is there maybe another guideline that sort of clarifies that?
First of all, I think I'm taking an edit there that maybe the second sentence should say, for example, because there might be other times where this comes up that we're not anticipating. I think the only example I can give that I think gets at the heart of this is if you purchase a product, let's say it's concrete, for example, just because this is what we're talking about, that has a machine stamped pattern. Let's say it's a wood grain with a little knot in it, and you buy that tile or that brick of concrete and you put it across your house, and there's a knot in the same quadrant of the brick for every brick that you have there. A human, we're very perceptive creatures, even when we don't realize it. We see that as fake. We know that's not real. We know it's not natural. We know it's not wood. We know it was never in contact with real wood. Well, the reason concrete's a good example is that when concrete is poured, it is almost either it's got a metal formwork, usually steel, or wood. And then you actually have the trace of the forest, the actual individual natural boards on the surface of the concrete. That's the type of tradition that we have, not just with pouring concrete, but I think I showed us a photo I took the other day of somebody who had hand-laid a bunch of aggregate pebbles on a patio. That's what we're talking about, using concrete as an artistic medium, not saying, oh, just because somebody came up with a product that might have feelings of wood, that's okay to throw that up on the house, and where it's repetitive and very fake looking.
I'd like to add something to that, actually. And that's the concrete is a bona fide building material back from Roman times. So if it shows wood formwork, it's not pretending to be wood. That's what formed concrete looks like. Whereas if you take concrete or any other material and you try to make it look like fake wood, it looks like fake wood. So I think we're trying to say artistically or properly used concrete, it's okay, but something pretending to be something else, especially when you can just look at it and say that doesn't look like something else, that's what we're trying to ban.
I totally agree, absolutely. The only thing that comes up as an example for me that's concerning is that when I bought my house, I thought it was natural stone, and I found out that it's actually a manufactured stone, but it's done so well that you'd never know. And this says here that that's not available because it fakes or mimics natural or other materials, textures, and finishes. So
It's a good point. I mean, cast stone is actually, it's hard to, it is a Roman product, actually. So there is a tradition also of using concrete in such a way that it is almost indiscernible from stone. But you know, it is in a way stone. It is from the earth and is being reformed. It's like a clay brick, you know, in a way. So I don't know, maybe we could add some language about cast stone, because cast stone is, it's not really it is manufactured, but it's an ancient material that's from the earth. It's like a clay brick. It's hard to describe and cover everything about it here, but there are, go ahead. Yeah.
I would argue, I mean, if I was working on a project with my team and we were taking something to planning commission, I think you might have it covered here. It says for example, use cast concrete only with non-uniform, handcrafted patterns such as those provided by wood formwork. So I think in the case of, cast stone, looking like stone, I think this covers it. I think if it's a good cast stone product, this would allow that, I think. I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, I've also seen, I mean, there's just, concrete is such an amazing material that you really can actually make it in such a way that it almost is stone. But there's also products that are so poorly done as mimicking, for example, there's a lot of fake slate. Concrete can almost never look like slate. But it's not meant to look like slate. It's meant to look more like limestone because it's basically a lime product. So it is a tough thing to fully describe.
I think I'm going back through the history of this group over the last year and a half. There was a point where there was a swing to thou shalt only put materials that were wrenched from the ground or from the forest onto your house. And I think we're maybe like swinging back the other way a little bit here.
Just for concrete, I think.
Yeah. But what if the language is more like, do not use manufactured materials that appear fake or mimic natural other materials in their textures or finishes? Because I know it's slippery. I know this, I'm just offering this up as an option because I think at some point you either have to decide that you're going to let the people implementing these guidelines, like the Planning Commission or Design Review Board, have that discretion to make a decision if something appears fake, or if you want it to be so black and white that you say it cannot be fake. So I'm just throwing that out as a thought conversation starter for the group.
Personally, I feel like to my eye around town, we are not, the appear fake is not working. I think if there's confusion, we should add more examples, but we are, I think it's hard without training to be able to put to words why we have visceral reactions to fake things. And so when you're having a discussion on the dais or with an applicant, you might think, it doesn't seem high enough quality or whatever, but I can't really express what's bothering me about it. It takes, I think, a lot of training and observation to make that distinction. And I have seen just around town that it is not working.
Yeah, I think the language you came up with here that says such as those by genuine wood formwork really gives you the tool to decide whether what is before you is appearing fake or not.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating about concrete, it is almost a natural material, but it is so, this is a word no one uses except in school, it's so plastic, it's so malleable that it's almost magic. If you do it right and you do it with handcrafted sensibility, you can do amazing things with concrete. That is not true of plastic, in my opinion. And it's probably not true of metal, but it's so close to stone, concrete. And clay would also be a similar material.
Well, that just spurred something because you say that's not true of metal, and that's actually not true. If metal is cast, then it's also true for metal. And I think maybe the casting is really the key word in that, because the minute, that's why the stamped pattern isn't good in concrete either. It's when it's cast, it's good, usually. So.
So I'm just offering this as an example. This you can pass it around as you like, but this is my home, and it looks really good. I think that would be nice if we had stone fake stone like that around town. But if we just want to say natural stone or authentic cast concrete or whatever, maybe. That is concrete. That's concrete, yeah. Okay.
It is a tough one. I mean, I think we're trying to solve a problem that exists in town with this language, and we'll see. Again, we'll see if this helps. I think it will help, but may need clarification.
One thing I want to offer that I've shared with the chair and others is that we're writing guidelines, but the exercise of this year and a half or however long this takes, having these conversations is bringing these things also to the forefront. So I have witnessed over the last year that this project has been going on, that these topics that we've been talking about in the community meetings in here have also become more forefront at the planning commission meetings. So they get talked about more. So the exercise of updating the guidelines is doing two things. It's giving us new language that we think is going to be better, but it's also bringing these design concepts to the forefront of design review. So I think that that's the other outcome of this, is that we're talking about how important it is that any sort of cast material looks good. That's going to get higher up on the list in these public meetings. So that's another thing just to think about too.
As an added advantage, I think, don't they ask for examples of materials often with houses that come before the planning commission so that they can actually see the materials themselves, which would help?
Yeah, they definitely do. And if there is a repeat, they talk about how many different shapes or samples of stone that are done. We could say a certain number.
So one, I'll just give one quick clarifying example. Your house with its cast stone facades, it looked to me, just in that brief photo, that each stone was of its own character, cast individually. Often, I don't want to, upset folks, but if you, maybe they won't be upset, but if you walk around town and look down at your feet at what folks think looks like a slate paver, what I see is like a tie-dyed manufactured product that is somebody's idea of, doesn't stone have like natural variety in color? And yes, it does. But it doesn't have that natural variety. That's not natural. That is like a tie-dyed t-shirt look. And it's like ombre. It looks like it's not real. So again, being super careful with concrete, I think, is our best bet, and getting better products like maybe the one that's on your house. I'll have to take a closer look in person too, David, but it can be done very beautifully.
We've got a hard stop at noon.
We have a hard stop at noon. Okay, oh gosh. So, all right, let's, yeah, go ahead.
So are we satisfied with this wording? Are we keeping this wording? That's what I want to know. I mean, okay, so it covers everything.
I'm adding the word "for example" in the beginning, just to connect those two sentences. But other than that, that was my observations.
Are we adding material appear fake?
Nope.
No?
Nope, not for now. We're trying it this way. Okay, so now we're moving on to 5.0.0. We just removed clip gables in 5.1.6. No one understood why that was there. We're down, I'm gonna.
And in the title, you were moving and restraint, right?
Yeah.
5.0.0.
We're going just to modesty.
And I'm still on 5.1.1 here, before we need to head. Design.
Hold on, Carol. Okay.
Thanks. 5.1.1, design a building consistently with the design concept extending to all sides of the building. And this is the part I have a problem with. And with no mixing of architectural styles. I think there's so many examples of even historic buildings that have a mix of architectural styles. And
styles is not supposed to be there. That's a good catch.
yeah.
It's supposed to be languages, but it's still the same point.
Yeah. I would like to remove, and with no mixing of architectural styles. I think that we have a lot of mixed architectural styles, and I don't know that we need to be pure. You know, we talk about being able to be creative. It's kind of asking us not to be creative, I guess.
So Carol, are you thinking that you could take, using the verboten word of styles, you could take two styles and kind of combine them in the look, in the cohesive look of one house? Is that what you're saying you want to allow, or something different?
I think so. I think generally speaking, it's probably a good idea to stick with one architectural style, but I think there are examples of houses that are really lovely that have a mix.
Yeah, I just have to use my house as an example again. You know, I've lived in France, and I don't know if my house is trying to be French or Italian or English or, you know.
Okay, I think this may be misunderstood. So we've been pretty strong, all of us, I think, all year about the authenticity of a building and the integrity of a building. So what this means is the concept extends to all sides of the building. It's not about whether you're interpreting an architectural language in a new way. So let's say you can't quite place that particular, even David's house, when it was conceived of, was it exactly a modern building? Was it exactly a cottage? I mean, it's something new. But once you've figured out what you're doing for your design, and you come to the planning commission, you don't say, well, the left-hand side of my building is Tudor, and the right-hand side of my building is colonial. That is what we're talking about. This is a principle that runs throughout this. So, and I think it's clear in 5.1 that we're talking about extending it around the building, not being creative with your language, or you can come up with something brilliant with your language, great.
Maybe I would offer, because if that's your design concept, is to do that, you're going to extend that design concept to all sides of the building, period. Maybe you don't need the clarifier of with no mixing architectural styles. Does that make sense? If that's your concept, just make your concept consistent.
We're trying to get it to pick a horse and ride it, kind of thing. You know, not midstream.
How many do we have like that? Like I have seen a couple of buildings we have that do look like there's some kind of Mediterranean craftsman beer house, you know, whatever, and they look terrible when they do that. It looks like someone just went to a catalog of architectural styles and just picked out things, but I'm not sure how to write language to catch that. So it's you know, sometimes I wonder, like, if it's not a big problem, maybe you don't need language.
5.1.3, look at that and see if that takes care of what you're talking about.
No, that's not it.
No?
Yeah, that's more like the busy, restrained.
You know, I think David is making me want to not cross out this thing. And with no mixing of architectural languages, first of all, it shouldn't say style, but I think it is true that you could also make the mistake of consistently across the whole building mixing colonial and Tudor and all things on each, and do it consistently around the building. That would not be what we were after either. So what you're talking, I think, Carol, is like a new language, a blending of languages. And if you can't quite place it and can't say, oh, that's definitely colonial architecture, that's okay. But not, it's a new language. But we're talking about mixing languages, established languages. That is something we're trying to avoid. And I think David's right. There are some atrocities around town that do that. Were you going to say something, Marianne?
Well, just as an example, I mean, the most common probably is when the house is very traditional on the street side, and then they want an ocean view, and then they, it completely falls apart in the back side because we want to look at the ocean. So it's modern in the back, but actually it's very conservative in the front. So I think that's what we are trying to address. You want a traditional house. You have a traditional house on all four sides, right? Yeah. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid. I've fought that battle many times. Okay, can we move on because I'm worried now about the time. I'm starting to get worried.
So languages instead of style?
Yes, that's the change. So if we go to page 17, there's no red except for we had all agreed that we wanted to not restrict the pitch of the roof. That's not the point. The point is in scale, and we wanted to add a diagram, which we don't have yet, but that makes that a little clearer about just proportion and scale of your roof. We had some clarifying language in 5.4.4, which just was hard to understand. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So these diagrams.
Hold on, Nancy. Hold on.
So these diagrams here don't show any attempt at providing eaves at all. These are all kind of the roof line stops at the vertical spot of the house, and so I'm not a fan of those diagrams. Along the right-hand side of page 16. So I'm a huge fan of eaves, and none of these don't really show much of eaves in the diagram. So just calling that out.
So I think just to defend these diagrams for a second, even though I don't really have any motive to do that, these are about massing these diagrams. And if you add the roof details or any details, you're distracting from, I think, the point of the diagrams. I believe that's why they're this simple.
These are actually about complexity. So you see
Right,
all these.
exactly. They're about complexity of form versus modesty of form. So, but then you go to the next one that has some photos of, images 2 pages later, and there's plenty of eaves. I think it's just extracting detail so you can focus on the issue there. So don't be alarmed about that, I would argue. So we've got the diagram of roof proportions that's going to be pending. Let's go to 5.4.0, which is use building details to provide interest, but not to exaggerate the scale of a building. Like I was saying, there was some clarifying language in 5.4.4, which is just almost to Marianne's point. If you choose a historic building, you cannot have enormous windows face, because you have all of a sudden, oh, I notice this beautiful view to the left side. I'm going to have a modern quadrant of my building, because the traditional architecture of that era that you've chosen cannot support that type of opening. So that was just trying to clarify that language. Folks in 5.5.0 wanted to add why the color scheme was muted to blend with the forest palette. I think nobody had any issues with that. We've added starkly to David's point, I think it was.
No, starkly, instead of avoid, can it be no, starkly contrasting color scheme?
We've used the word avoid throughout as a verb to say you can't do it. So I don't think it's meant to be wishy-washy. We could look at that in general throughout the throughout the document if we like, if that's not strong enough. I don't know if there's another one, another good word, verb. Yeah, go ahead.
So in 5.35, proportion roofs to the scale of the building. And then there's stuff there and the sumps crossed out, and the section seems to be just human scale. And we've had a lot of conversations about blocking views and roofs that are too tall, et cetera, et cetera. But then the only thing we have in there is limit flat roofs to one-story structures or setback. And it seems to me that if you're going to have a two-story building that you approve, a pitch roof is the one that's going to block your view more than a flat one, and a pitch roof is going to have more mass than a flat one. So if we're talking about minimizing mass, having simplicity, and optimizing views, then we'd be telling everybody to have a flat roof. So it's strange to me that the only thing in here is it says limit flat roofs to one story.
Just so you know, there's a whole section on views that's about fitting with your context of your neighbor and stuff, and that would dictate the type of roofs that might go in front of the Planning Commission, how you might adjust them to be respective of the view. So this is, let's just make sure we're separating those two things, that this is about modesty and simplicity and human scale. Now, whether we want to talk about the flat roofs or not, that's in that context, in this part, I think is worth discussing. Brandon, I'm going to get that back to you.
I was just going to say that the part of the reason, and this sort of came out of real life examples we've experienced over the last few years, is that the limiting to a one-story, typically a one-story house is, in most cases around here, is not going to be blocking someone's view. It's that second story that starts to block people's view, which gets to, you know, pushing that flat roof on the second story back, because a flat roof is more mass on the second story. It's a box versus a pitch, where you can see left and right of the pitch, versus a box on the second story is the entire upper view. So that was the concept there. But like Victoria said, we have a whole nother section that this is only one test. This is about the massing and the scale.
I guess it would depend how tall the roof is, right? If your ceiling is 10 feet and that ceiling is your flat roof, or on top of that 10-foot ceiling, you have a pitch roof, then the pitch roof in every single case would be higher. The flat roof is only higher if you have it be 10 feet plus, you know, the height of what the pitch roof would have been. So I guess to me it depends what you mean. And if that's the issue, is the total height, then total height would be the rule that I would say we go with versus the shape of the roof.
I'm going to pass to Marianne, but just again, think about the maximum building envelope thing that we have coming, that we haven't seen yet, but that also should help control this.
You keep saying that. You guys have seen it.
Well, no, we've seen the way it works, but we haven't seen what is going to actually end up. Sorry, I'm not trying to be discouraging, but think about it this way, David. If you have a two-story building that's at its height limit, and the height limit is squared all the way around at 2 stories versus the second story has to be within a pitch, then of course you are reducing the mass, and possibly this building envelope diagram will address that.
Yeah, and that's why we go back to height, not shape.
It's height, right, exactly. It's are you building out the full volume or not, I think is what this is about. On the second story.
I think what gets overlooked here is that floor area ratio regulates, right, the total floor area. So you automatically, if you use a flat roof, have a much narrower footprint on the second story than you have with a pitched roof. So I actually don't think there's any difference between a flat and a pitched roof, and I would also argue it might be good to not regulate that, because if I go with a second story flat roof, I have to have a much smaller volume than with nothing under the 5-foot counts, right? So I actually have more volume in a pitched roof than in a flat roof. And it just depends where that is located in relationship to the neighbor's yard, right? Or view.
Mary, would you mind weighing in on the exactness of this?
Limit flat roofs to 1-story structures or set back from the front property line.
Is that something that, would you, if you could clarify your remark into like an edit, could you do that?
I just don't know that we need to limit it. I think we need to evaluate each situation, because nothing is more complex than the views, because the view is always somewhere else from each property, and it all depends on what other houses are there in front of you, right? Sometimes, I don't. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
No, go ahead, but just is there anything about this that you feel is overly limiting, or in terms of scale and human forms and things like that?
I think we talk about that we want a building to have good proportions, and I just wonder if we need that 5.3.5.
So I go back to the general plan, and I go back to what it says there, and we can leave it or take it, but I would still always go back to the general plan and say, is this the established village character to have a big 2-story block that looks like commercial building? In its structure, in its massing, it looks commercial because of that. So that would be my concern.
And I think we have that earlier in the paragraph, that we don't want residential buildings to look industrial or commercial. And I think that would take care of that, I thought.
Brandon, do you have a comment about this and whether it's working or why it's there? Or this is nothing. I don't think any of us invented this. I think this was been there, done that. It's traditionally language that was there.
I want to comment on whether it's working. I don't know if it is. I don't know if it's, I guess, to the point that somebody I think was trying to make was, I don't know if there's a problem that this is actually trying to solve, if we're just saying, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. Yeah, but I think to the point that we've already solved somewhere else is what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if this one does anything to help make it more solved or not.
Are you voting to keep this thing or not, Brandon? Okay, so what we're saying is maybe we certainly want the outline and the image that we're looking forward to having proportionate, the roof forms, but we're saying the second half of it is taken care of elsewhere, the second half of the statement?
Perhaps we could just reference back to that. That might be a good compromise between the different perspectives. We could say limit flat roofs to 1-story structures or setback from the property lines if the bulk makes it appear commercial or industrial or something like that. Then there's some subjectivity. The planning commission can say, well, this actually does look residential even though it has a flat roof. So that would be okay for folks in that scenario.
You'll get the same house with a 5-degree slope, and they'll say it's not a flat roof, it's a pitch roof, and it'll be the same. You'll have the same problem. I think we need to make a rule that has you not have that house. Sorry, I just think that there's workarounds that people would just get, and you would still have the same number of ugly houses. It just won't have a perfectly flat roof, because the issue with that house isn't that its roof is flat. The issue with that house, I mean, we could make a list of the issues actually with that house, right? Like, it doesn't fit in any way, shape, or form, and it feels to me like we should not just pick out one element and say, well, let's say if we said that, they couldn't have built it. But I'm telling you that whoever designed that house could creatively build a house that you would not like, that doesn't have a flat roof. And it would be just as bad, and it would have fit the rule. So I think that we should think more about what was wrong with that house that made it not fit, and ensure that we get houses that fit. And I would actually point to my house, which is the Henry Hill house. It actually has a 2-story flat roof. And interestingly enough, it also has a 2-story pitched roof next to it. And that roof is up an extra 6 feet because it's pitched. So there is significantly less bulk, and I do think it fits in the neighborhood, and it's organic architecture and all that. So I don't think there's something inherently wrong with flat. I do think there's something inherently wrong with that building you showed us the picture of.
What is it that makes yours, because maybe we can use that, maybe, what is it that makes your 2-story flat roof? What is it that makes that good? Could we turn that into something here?
I would want someone else to look at it and say that, because I'm hardly objective of my own house, but it's organic architecture from our area. Like it was designed to fit into a forest and
That's it.
yeah.
It's organic and it fits into the forest.
Well, we've got that covered.
We've
got it covered.
Well, so I'll tell you,
Wait, we gotta get moving, sorry.
but this is so important.
I know, it's very important, and I think we've got it handled. I mean, the fact that we have three sections on fitting in with the forest, if that doesn't look like it fits in the forest, and you have 3 whole sections about fitting into the forest, then let's not try to take care of it with this flat roof thing. I think I'm persuaded, and I think we're moving on. I'm sorry, we're moving on. We're,
just use the first sentence and
yes, that's what I've done. I've crossed out the second sentence. Okay, good. Okay, now we're going to move on to where we were, which is 5.5.0. Oh no, there's nothing really there. We're on 6. We had gone back. Okay. 6.0.0, detail every property authentically and consistently. We added here under 6.1.0 something we had been meaning to add, which is about dummy and fake elements. So it's almost like a big scale, medium scale, and small scale authenticity. We already had the details, we had the big picture authenticity, but we didn't have like, oh, by the way, don't add medium scale things either, like fake doors and windows like on the Sunset Center that everybody hates. So, and then there's a note about proportioning your shutters correctly.
yeah. I generally agree with that, except there are houses where shutters look very nice, where there's not room for a large shutter that would cover the window. Oh, yeah.
My house.
Nancy's house.
My house.
You can have a folding shutter. Like if you don't have enough space, like in France they do that a lot. When you don't have enough
Oh,
space
yeah.
inside, you can have it fold and then it can
Oh,
fold
good
over.
idea.
So that would look authentic.
Hadn't thought about that.
So, nobody's coming for your shutters if they don't fit right now. But this is for the future. So when folks are deciding how to proportion their windows and shutters and whether they fold or don't fold, that they look like they actually could work. And if you're smart, I think, and a storm is coming, you might say, why don't I just hinge them also so I can actually use them? But at least you get the proportions correct. So don't worry about your old shutters. And yes, I think that David's right about the performance of different folding techniques and stuff. We took out in 6.1.5, we took out the textured and the modeling stuff, just said faux finishes. That was the original intent. This was in 6.1.6. This was a decision the community seemed to make. I think we're going to try it on for size, to be authentic also in the details of the structural elements. If you're trying to express a structural element and it's costing you too much to do it, then shift gears and don't express that structural element. That was the point of that discussion. Does anyone think that's captured incorrectly or? Okay. Nothing else that's really read there. So now we're on 6.2.0. In 6.2.3, use one primary material for building walls. Brandon and I had a long discussion about this. We felt it was confusing, and we just tried to clarify the language. That's basically what this is in the first half of the sentence, of the paragraph. Use one primary material for building walls with at most one additional subordinate material. In other words, we are not, that's what it always meant. But one of the things we noticed is it had said use one primary material for the building. And we thought, well, you can't make the roof and the wood and the windows all out of stucco. The roof is not stucco, the windows are not stucco. We're talking about the building walls. So that's what we were clarifying there. The second part is crossed out because, I don't know, we just thought, is this what we really want? Once a species of wood or stone is selected, do not combine it with other species within a single project. We can determine that or debate it, but that was, in our discussion, we're thinking, I don't know if it seemed superfluous to Brandon, but okay.
I like it. I think it's really cool. The only thing I was thinking about, there are some traditional styles that have several different things. You know, Comstock have a lot of different things, and it's you know, they have rock and brick and timbers and stucco.
Yeah.
So if we just say except where the building materials traditionally would dictate more or something like that. Something along those lines. I mean, generally speaking, I love it. I think simplicity about that is much better. It looks great. But there are, I mean, just if you just look at like Tudor, you've got brick, you've got half timbers, and you got stucco. That's 3.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I agree.
you know, it's just a little too restrictive.
Yeah. Maybe we could say, instead of at most, just say typically one additional or something like that.
I hate to use style, but if it goes with, if it's integrated because that is the style of the building, that's one thing. Sure, you could have 3, but you know, if it's not part of the language or style, whatever, then it shouldn't be there. You know, it has to have integrity. Whatever you're doing has to have integrity, overall integrity.
So I think we've got, I agree with you, Melanie. I think that's covered in many places. I think here, this is actually to me a similar topic to the one we just had about consistent architectural language around a building. Yeah.
So this
That's true. Okay,
this
Brandon's.
when reproducing this. 4.2.2 says, when reproducing historic architecture, use the same materials and craftsmanship as those of the reproduced period. So I think that if we don't change, I think it's a good point. If we don't change the one we're working on right now, it sort of contradicts this.
So one thing, I think that the intent here was, just to back up for 1 second, the discussion we just had about there's some properties in town where somebody decided they liked Tudor colonial and they were consistent in the whole building, and it's a mess on every side of the building. I think that when Brandon and I were talking about the vibe that we thought this was intended to, and this is not new. This is not a new clause. This is something that's always been there. What we were trying to understand the meaning of it was, when you are telling the postman where to deliver the packages, I live in the wood house, I live in the stucco house, I live in the brick house, as opposed to I live in a brick, stucco, timber siding, but you know, that's not, well, so I think, and there was some confusion in the original language that we were trying to clarify, where it said use at most 1 or 2 materials on the wall. And Brandon at one point thought that meant 1 or 2 extra materials. So there's another thought here, which is to allow another material. Use one prime.
Just strike it, because we've got complexity throughout the document. We've got, we don't even need this.
We don't need it.
Yeah.
Well, here's one other thought, just to try this on for size. We could end the sentence at walls. Use 1 primary material for the building walls.
No, but then you've got rock, you've got stucco, you've got half timbers on.
But the idea being that not that you don't have a complexity of materials, but that there is a primary material. You see what I'm saying? So basically, again, you would say to the postman, it's a stucco house. Now, of course, it has timbers, et cetera.
I feel like complexity is our enemy, and there's so much complexity in this document, and you know, everything's so open for interpretation that I just don't think that this language is going to help us. Unless, you know, like if we don't have a big problem where we can point to this and say, this is going to solve that problem, then I think we have enough rules.
So let's just go revisit this one more time. There's an idea here about using building materials or features in a consistent manner. That's the subheading. The idea that I believe was meant in the original 25 years ago document is there should be an identity to the building that's primary. Now, the language of how many materials you add after the primary identity is maybe not important. Maybe we leave that aside. It's taken care of elsewhere. The question I think before us is, does it make sense? For example, David, you live in a naturally weathered wood building. It has concrete pavement. It has, I think you have some translucent plastic on your top of your carport. There's all sorts of different elements that are there that are secondary to the primary identity of a wood, naturally patinaed building in the forest. I think that was the intent of it. What is it primarily the identity of the project? If we want to take that out, I don't think that's elsewhere right now that I'm aware of.
So I think that when we talk about authenticity and integrity, design integrity, I'm all there. I worry when we have a concept like that and then we try to micromanage it by making these really specific, and so therefore you can't do blah, 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 because then there's going to be someone with an unbelievably amazing design concept that would amaze us and surprise us and delight us, that they won't be able to do their house. And so I feel like I don't want to limit future creativity. I just don't want people to make those ugly Frankenstein houses. And so, you know, if that means that some of us are going to have to be able to say, I live 3 doors down from the weird purple house, I'd rather have that than have it be a lot of laws where no one can make the weird purple house, but they can't make 10 other wonderful houses.
Well, I'm with you there conceptually. So my question to the table is, this has always been here. The primary material is, we've never talked about this before, about eliminating it entirely. We're basically saying you don't need to have a single primary material for the building. You can just have a complete mixture of materials in equal proportion. That, if we take that out, that's what we're saying. This has always been here. I'm not arguing one way or the other. It's just we have never discussed it. I don't know what the architects in the committee think about this. I don't know if they want to weigh in. I just think we have to realize what we're doing. We're taking out something that may not have been effective. I don't know. Maybe it's taken care of it elsewhere now, but it is a concept that is only seen here, that the building has a material identity that's primary. Does anyone? Yeah.
Well, it hasn't worked, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have these type of buildings that we're looking at. So since it hasn't worked, and if we have very strong language in terms of design integrity and massing, it may not be needed. I don't know.
Putting that aside, what's your thought about a primary building material?
It actually goes without saying, I think, if you have design integrity, which we say earlier, right? That we want this, we want a coherent style. That actually already implies a primary building material suited to that particular style of building. So.
I think we have said it other places, but given that it's a 6.2.0, use building materials or features in a consistent manner, I think Victoria would feel comfortable, I don't want to speak for you, but to include something, and maybe just saying use one primary material for building walls, period.
I think it is not, things that are similar are covered elsewhere. My conjecture is here that one of the reasons a lot of things haven't worked is because of the opacity of the document, which is something this whole community has worked on so hard for the last several months, is to have a statement with a number in front of it that you can point to and say, hey, this is something we believe in. It's possible that many of these problems, we don't know why things are not being understood by the applicants, for example. So I just didn't want us to jettison this concept, which doesn't show up anywhere unless we're consciously doing it and really want it gone. And it sounds as an architect, I'm a little afraid of it. Marianne says it goes without saying, a good architect with integrity would obviously have a primary not like third, you know, something would be primary. So I'm inclined, obviously, to leave it, but if there are strong objections, then I think we should debate it. It's a big change.
I like what Carol said.
All right, well, that's what I was crossing out as we were talking. So it's the first clause, yeah, use one primary, okay. All right, that was long, but it was an important discussion, I think. All right, I'm flipping the page to 21. We had some clarifying language. This is now in 6.3.0 about details, making all details integral elements of the overall building design concept. This one is about how you do that with skylights. We want to blend, so these are just clarifying things. We had talked about these things before. The only change is about how to, I don't know, control the amount and positioning of the skylights. So it's preserve the overall roof form by respecting the maximum allowable percentage of skylight area. That is something that's going to be somewhere in a regulation. And the minimum allowable distance from eaves. Someone had pointed out, I think it was Eric, that sometimes they creep down close to the edge of the roof, and that looks funny. So somehow that will be in a regulated spot, and that's why it's underlined. Melanie, you wanted it to not be visible from the street, and now we've got that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy.
You're happy. Melanie's happy. Then we know we've succeeded. Because skylights has been a big thing for you, which is good. Okay, so 6.3.8. Oh, so if there are no comments on that, we just struck Victorian. Okay, go ahead.
Don, at the last meeting, 6.3.8, you had some photographs from Carolyn Walker Davis. Does this satisfy her concerns that she raised?
I think so, but I have to go back and look at them again to be doubly sure.
I think that we were limiting the style and materials. Yeah. Yeah.
You remember? Well, I think it was, we didn't want people to not be artistically expressive with metalwork if wasn't that it? Yeah. And so Victorian was something generally we thought was weird to call out, I think was why we struck it. But
if I remember correctly, I think there was a concern about all of the fences winding up being the same. I may be mistaken. Right. Yeah. So, like, there's in my project that I want to do eventually, I want to make a lower fence, and the Grape State fence is what everybody's doing. So anyway, I don't want everybody to have the same fence. That's all. And I think that's what she's saying.
Okay, well, I don't think by striking Victorian, I don't think we've done much. It is odd to have the word Victorian show up one place in the whole document. It makes no sense, really.
Yeah, and I think Carolyn was also talking about open fences, inviting fences, porosity of the fence, so you can see and get a feel for what's in the front yard and not having things walled or fenced off. She was definitely talking about that too.
Okay, we've got like 11 minutes. So let me just quickly, oh no, okay.
One thing before we take off on 21, we have the first picture up here. I walk by this place all the time, and it seems to me that this is very glaring in a way, I mean, it might be charming, but I mean, is this the right picture for what we're trying to achieve?
We're going to do that later.
Okay.
All right, first David, then Marianne.
My only concern with 6.3.8 is that it reads handcrafted any fences using unfinished grape stakes or wood picket fence, and that's it. So if you want to do like a craftsman style fence, that has a top rail and slats, and stuff like that, that's unacceptable. Marianne?
I don't, Victoria, actually, because I really have to leave at noon again. I wanted to have a general, so I don't want to cap this right now if you guys still want to talk about fences. But I think this is our last meeting before this goes to the city council. Is that correct? So I just had some questions, if I may do that at this time. This was the first time I really had the opportunity to, take the draft that we had, take what is on the table right now, and spend some time with both documents. So I had some questions. One was, how is this? What are we exactly proposing, or how is this supposed to work? And what prompts my question is that there's a lot in here that I find very useful that is not here. So how can you explain what your vision was, how to square those two documents?
So there's not my vision in any way, shape, or form, but the community wanted to organize the whole document in such a way that it was always about the values of the community and that it was easy to reference. All the stuff, this is why it's going to be strange, I think, to go to the council with this in the state it's in. We have, because of the thought experiment of drawing out all the sort of mandatory or guiding principles and their sub-principles, we have been able to address them in ways that they've never been addressed before, with a level of clarity and straightforwardness that we have not seen and is not in the existing document. But what we have never yet done is go back and find the stuff that is explanatory, that is in that document that's very rich, and figure out how to make sure where that's retained. And the idea, at least that we have been floating, is that when we get that stuff finished and refined, it would be in the appendices, so that you can always link to the appendices, get the background for the appendices, but that basically it's a kind of a true outline, in the sense of you can look at the headings, the Roman numerals on the first page, and then you go Roman numerals down into details. It is never meant to exclude any information, actually. It is purely a reformatting that folks thought would help deal with the fact that nobody knows you're supposed to use a primary building material on the wall, because now it has a spot on a page with a number, and we can have rational discussions about it. So the idea that we're talking about two different types of information is false. It would be false. If it was presented to the council that way, that would be false. The information should be the same. It's just the reformatting that is not complete with this. So I don't know, because this is like taking the core of the first document and refining it, but not finishing this document yet.
Victoria, I was maybe referring to additional information that is in here that I think has a value, and I wanted to know where that would be placed in this vision, because how, for example, the heading, how the design guidelines are organized with this graph that is here, I find really useful.
It's in the appendices that don't yet exist.
Okay. And I just think that this is really good where it lives right here, not in an appendix, but...
We're not excluding anything.
No. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm addressing. I wonder, but I don't think it's maybe that good in an appendix. What I'm trying to express is I really like a few things that are in here, like that how the design guidelines are organized, I think is an introductory page, like it is here in the front of a document, not in an appendix. And the same, I really liked when I went through here, I really liked understanding context. I think that is something that should be up front somewhere, because that is an introduction to all of this that follows. And then I personally, when I first came here many, many years ago, I remember reading this and how valuable it was to understand the historic pattern, how the city developed. All of that I think is a good introduction that you should read before you read this. So that was my question. How do you envision that these things that I think are valuable will work with this document?
So the answer is we don't know. I'm trying to make that clear. This has been an extraction of the core of the document to organize it properly and so that it's clear and enforceable. That is what makes this, I think Brandon keeps talking about his fears that something is lost, et cetera. I think it's a very unfair, I think your question is a good question. It is unfair to compare something that is partially formatted to something that is fully formatted in a different way. So we are missing all that information still. It's all. So whether it's primarily, right now it's got a placeholder in the appendix so that it's never lost. If somebody says, oh, you know what, of all these things, really it's good to have an introductory page between the front cover page and that explains more, then so be it. We don't know yet because we haven't gotten to it yet. And that's what makes this such a bizarre thing. And I think that's what's worrying Brandon about how you present basically a fully cooked, though very draft and flawed document with something that's less flawed, but not cooked at all.
So thank you for bringing this up because I had some notes. We're not ready for prime time. We're not ready for the council. If we don't know, and we've been dealing with this since November, it's like being a movie script writer and going to the studio boss and saying, I have this great script, but I don't have an end for it yet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's premature.
We agree. I think we
agree. Yeah.
Everybody over here agrees.
I don't want to give the impression that I was saying I'm scared that things are being like dropped or left out. The whole reason to go to council is because we as a group have made a sort of like formatting presentation change of how to present the guidelines. And I think it's important to bring council along in that conversation. I think if we show up in 4 or 5 months after this thing's fully baked and spend all of everybody's time and show up with a completely reformatted version where everything lives in an appendix and there's only one intro page and it looks very different, and we're not creating sections about windows, we're not creating sections about skylights, we're not creating sections about specific things, and they say this is not what we wanted, then we would have wasted a bunch of time.
Well, we've wasted a lot of time already.
Well, that's a fine statement, but do you want to waste more and possibly come back 6 months later? That's my point. The reason to go to council is because council is the one that set this project on. They're the project sponsor, basically, if you want to think about it that way. And so we, as a group, as a community, are bringing back a project to them. And so I think we owe it to them to bring it back and say, this is the direction that we are going. Are we completely off track?
So I personally am not looking for guidance on whether we're on track or not, personally. I think that this community has been working very hard to make the very best document they can. Whether stuff ends up on the final page or in an intermediary page or an upfront page has yet to be decided. We've been working on the core of what needs to be clear about our values in this community. That's all we've done so far. If let's just play this out. If the council were to say, from what we see, this just it's not ever going to work, I don't believe that this community would then say, okay, that does it for us. You don't think it's ever going to work, but we would like to still see if it would work. We would like to finish the task and make the best document that we think we could bring forward to you. So I do agree, it's nice to have an update now and then, here's what we're working on, et cetera. I don't personally believe if the council sends it out to the community and to a steering committee to present their best effort about what they think. This is not yet done, as Doug said. It is not yet a complete effort. So asking for somebody to judge whether we're going in the right direction now without seeing the whole thing makes no sense. As an update, it makes sense. Okay, David.
Just so 2 quick comments. First, to Mary Ann's point, and actually going by some of what you were reading to us, David, earlier, I think if you don't have context to create a mental framework, that you can then perceive all of this book of rules, you're going to misperceive the book of rules. So I believe, and if it's in an appendix, ain't going to be read. I mean, that's just flat out. So I actually do believe that up front, we should set the context so people say, I understand what it means to build a place in Carmel and what Carmel character means. And then the rules make sense to you. So I totally agree with that. With respect to the city council, and I don't know what the dynamic has been because I haven't been at the meetings where we've presented this, but I used to run a lot of really complicated cross-functional projects at a large corporation. And man, you need to take your sponsors along with you the whole way. So I wouldn't say you were trying to say, hey, is this okay? And give them the whole thing. But if you're not getting guidance and having them walk the path with you, then you're setting yourself up for an unpleasant surprise. And so I'm with Brandon there. And I think that, we could talk about the structure of what that conversation should be with them. But man, I really think that we should be making sure that they're on the path with us and that they don't stray off.
Yeah, let me build on that. And I hear you saying you totally agree, but you didn't agree with me when I said it. But we're going for an update. I want to take them for an update. I never once said it's going for a judgment. But that's the update. The whole reason for bringing them along is they don't get surprised later down the road. But I just want to make it clear that the city council presentation is not the Brandon show. I've asked all of you to come and be part of that meeting and explain what we've been doing as a team. This is not Brandon going and telling on the steering committee or telling on David and Carol. This is me presenting an update to our project sponsor of what we're doing. And I would hope and encourage all of you to come to that meeting so it can be a conversation with council.
Okay. But can I just... Yeah, I was frightened to have something unfinished judged or said we shouldn't go forward with it because I think we've made amazing progress. It's not been an easy process sometimes, today especially. But we're making great progress. We're communicating. We're getting to something that makes sense for everybody. And that's wonderful. And it's a fantastic thing. What Nori did doesn't do that. It doesn't make sense to us as a community. The people who had the patience to read it don't like it. It doesn't make sense. And if you're comparing this or that, it's not fair to us as the community who's trying to work on this. Nori's product doesn't work, period. No, I agree. I understand you disagree, but I'll tell you, all the people I talk to, which is a lot of the community and people who are leading the community, don't like it. They don't want it. And I don't want to see us compared to that. If you give a big Bible and you say, oh, compare that to these little leaflets over here, what do you think is a better product? They're going to say, oh, well, that big one over there, with all of those words, they must be valuable. No, they're not. So anyway, I'm getting a little sassy. I'll shut up. Thanks.
Very sad. I do think there's fear in the room. This is why I think it's talking about words. An update, here's how we're doing, this is our goal, et cetera, is in line with a advisory body. Tell us what to do right at this moment before we finish. I think that's the fear, is that's how it's going to be presented. So, obviously everyone being around is helpful, but nobody wants to be in conflict going in. If we're in conflict, then that's a problem. Melanie, sorry.
Yeah. When we started this project, we stated some truths about the previous work, which I sat on as well as am on this one. And we tried to say, some of us who've had experience with the previous document, that the document did not work. It was not properly used. People found it contradictory, burdensome, and not appropriate. After all those years of having it, people just did not, the Planning Commission didn't even really look at it. They didn't cite it in any of their findings for whatever they were doing, their decision-making, whatever they were doing. We got the same darn thing from Nori again. And this time it was longer. And it was equally contradictory in the text. And it was contradictory what we all said from the beginning, that we wanted a terse, concise document that everybody in the community could read and understand what we were looking for. The public in general, future homeowners, architects, staff, and just the general public. And we didn't come up with that. We got it late. We've been rushing to get where we are right now and have tried to come up with a quality document. I don't see that they're going to understand. That's what worries me, is they're not going to understand why we reformatted stuff. We reformatted it so it would be usable.
So come and explain it. That's my point. This is an
Oh, you better believe I'm going to be doing it. I have done it for the last year, you know? And so I think that that's what concerns me, is every time we've gone to the council for anything, the only thing they did agree with was the landscape plan, thank God. But they've sat on us on everything else we've tried to present to them. And so the attitude.
That's pre-cooked.
Yeah.
Pre-discussed.
Yeah.
Pre-decided.
Yeah. And so I have a real problem. Number one, I'm going to stop working on what I have been diligently working on with the appendices, because it's, I'm not going to spend, any more time until I have,
But let Marion, don't give up, Melanie. It's valuable.
I have someone come to the office, clients come to the office in 10 minutes, so I got to run down. But may I, because we're only supposed to work in a public forum, but may I email, how does this work? I would like to email some suggestions that I think it would need to be added, not in an appendix, but to this document in order to make it a workable or usable document. So do I email this to just you and Brandon? I mean, it would be nice to get more input from the committee, but that we can't do, right? Or can I blind copy, or how does this work?
come back and say, how do we fill this out? I mean, that's.
I think that's really important, so. And I'm sorry to have to eat and run, so to speak.
It's good that you raise it. I think the whole issue, again, is we're comparing apples and oranges. I think that's the way to put it. That, you got a little baby apple on a tree here, and we got a big orange over there, and you cannot compare the two until the apple is really grown up. And I think that this is, what we're talking about is the sense, maybe, that folks think this is it. This is not it. This is the core of the other document that we've been trying to refine. How those other, and again, this, maybe we should have said, instead of appendices, like placeholder, but this is, always thought of as these are going to be separate sections of the document. Whether one of them migrates or two of them migrate forward, because that makes more sense, I think is something to figure out. But we have not even started on that yet. So I know, Brandon, you have a hard stop. That's not, now we're done.
So I'm past that now, so they're just gonna have to wait for me. I don't want people to leave here scared. So the whole point is, as David chimed in as well, this is an update to our project sponsor, the people that set us off on the road on this. This is not going to take and compare what we've been working on and say, do you like it or not like it? Because it's too early in that. But I've tried to make it clear that I don't feel comfortable showing up 5-6 months later at the city council with it looking completely different and having them, for the first time, hear that. They know it already, obviously, because people talk. Right. And so we don't know what people are saying to them about that. So let us be the ones that go and give them an update about the project that we're working on. That's the whole point of this meeting, is to go and update the people who set us off on this charge to do this.
Always wise. I totally agree. Always wise to do that. Totally agree. I think, again, the fear in the room is that there would be a misrepresentation of what's being proposed.
I mean, if come to the meeting, obviously I'm the one that's going to write the staff report and do the presentation. If I say something that you think is not right, it misrepresents what people say, I welcome everybody to come up. I'm going to do my best, just like Victoria does when she's, taking in comments from 100 people and putting them into red lines. She did her best. I'm going to do my best. But if I say something wrong, that's why I want you all to come. Especially this, I'm speaking to the members of the public here, but especially the steering committee. This is your product that you've been working on with the community with me. So please come and also have the conversation with City Council. I know, Melanie, you feel like they don't listen, but you have to come and talk to them. So that's the thing. I know.
So I think one solution to this, and I know this is procedural and we're past the point here, but it's possible, and I would say this, I don't want to do it myself, but I do believe that in the past, as chair of other committees and subcommittees and ad hocs, when I was on the council, the presentation came from the advisory body, which is, and I think it would be probably allay fears if it was a joint presentation between the chair of the steering committee and the staff, and that it was formalized like that, not that, or another representative from the steering committee. I don't have to be me, but I'm just saying that it is a break with tradition, in my understanding of Carmel, to have it be a solo staff presentation. So if you and I want to collaborate about it, or you want to collaborate with some other member of the steering committee to make the presentation, I think that would allay some fears, because traditionally in Carmel, when the advisory body is constituted, that advisory body reports back. I have never seen it done any other way. So to have it only be the staff reporting is unusual in many of our experiences. So I put that out as a possible suggestion, that you and I collaborate on that. I don't know why we wouldn't do that, but I think the formal structure of just staff and yet come if you like, steering committee and community, is a little bit of a break with our Carmel tradition. I don't know what you think about that.
Let me think about it.
So this is what I mean. This is, the community understands and is afraid that the staff does not represent or won't represent the steering committee and the public process, because it is usually not done that way in the past.
I don't know if that's true.
Well, we've been here longer.
Yeah, we have people who have been very involved for a long time. Excuse me, I have the talking stick, Brandon. Excuse me. No, I just want to know why not.
I just got put on the spot and asked a question.
No, but what would be wrong about having one of the leaders of this?
I've got to work out. I mean, I'll work with Victoria on it. I'm not going to sit here and debate.
Okay. No, I don't want to debate. I don't want to. No, I'm just asking. She asked you a question.
I said I can't answer that right in this moment.
But why?
Because I don't know the timing of it. I got to write a staff report in the next couple of days. I don't know if the timing's going to work out. I will work with Victoria on it. That's what I said.
That's all. That's all we need. You know? Okay, that's great. Cool. Work with Victoria.
No, again, I think the reason there's tension in the room is because of historic patterns that we are accustomed to. I believe that that's what's happening. And so that I'm bringing it up just to air that. That's my perception of what's happening, is that.
I didn't say no.
No, I know. I understand.
So
I understand.
I don't know why everyone got so upset. I didn't say no.
No, I understand. I'm just saying that this is the fear in the room, that normally speaking, an appointed body then reports directly back to the council with staff support. And so, as opposed to being invited, that is the tradition that's different. So I just throw that out there. I believe that's accurate.
For what it's worth, when I offered the very first time that I wanted to go to City Council and give them an update, this body didn't think that was a good idea. So I felt like I was on my own having to go give this update to City Council. So if we now want to do it as a joint presentation, that's a little bit different than what it was before. Nobody else seemed to think that was a good idea before. So that's part of it as well.
I don't know. Okay, well, maybe we talk offline about it. I don't know. I just think that there's, I think we're in a good place now in terms of the document and the good work and the collaboration. I do really think that, but I think as a community, we just need to make sure the council sees that clearly, I think, is the fear. So anyway, Brandon, it's okay to talk about elsewhere.
Okay.
Any other final comments? I think we got through that document. I had hoped we'd get through commercial too. I think what we're going to have to do is let it sit, the commercial, for now. The changes are very similar.
Yeah. Well, I'll just
it's
attach
pretty.
The residential one.
Yeah.
Use that as an example
It's
of what we're doing.
true. We could do that. It's pretty consistent. Anyone can always write in, as folks have already. We still have to do that check of like whether there's some glaring things that people have picked up in their notes and that we haven't. We've picked up some of them today. So I want to thank everybody for all that. Constantly concentrating on this. It's very inspiring. Okay. I think we're going to have to adjourn. Sorry for going over. Sorry for being late. I think we have that scheduled that we worked out already. We have another scheduled meeting that Brandon will notice. Yeah, I just don't.